Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. So, this should be an interesting debate that we're going to be having today. It's with Vegan Foot Soldier on whether shellac is vegan. I'm taking the position that shellac is not vegan, as it, kills animals. So, yeah, that's what we're going to be debating today. I'm going to jump into our theory. I hope everyone's having a lovely day, and someone from the server said hello. So, hello from them. And, and, we're going to get straight into it. Actually, one thing before we do, hopefully this is coming through on Twitch, because I actually had to cancel this stream and then do it again because Twitch wasn't receiving the stream. So hopefully this is coming through okay on Twitch. And yeah, we're going to have a nice stream tonight, guys. Tonight. Let's do it. Should you just make sure that everything's A-okay? A-okay. Hopefully it's like, I don't even know if it's probably, actually I'm going to quickly check and make sure this is coming through even on YouTube properly, because I know that there was an issue before. So it says there's 9 viewers now, so yeah, it looks like it's coming through. Right, there we go. Cool, man. Cool. Right. Let us know if there's any issues with the audio or anything like that, guys. And yeah, let's jump into this debate. Oh.
This has just arrived.
Hello. How are you doing, guys?
Fine, are you live?
Yes, I am live. I was about to say.
Nice one. Well, should we get Stone to introduce the prop and we can get straight into it?
Yeah, let's go for it, man. Let's go for it.
Yeah, sounds like a plan, guys. So we do have an official debate happening with Foot Soldier and Perspective Philosophy. And for this debate, Foot Soldier's taking the position that shellac is vegan and Perspective Philosophy is taking the opposition. As always, when we base upon who concedes, we don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to the popular vote of the audience who is here for 75% of the debate to conclude the winner. Thank you both so much for debating, as always, and you can get started.
Yeah. Do you want to explain, since it's your proposition, man?
Yeah, I can dive into it. I haven't written an introductory statement for this one.
That's fine. That's fine. No, I don't think. I think sometimes they clog things up anyway. Like when you have to get when you get bogged down with like scripts and shit like that. They'll just keep it we'll keep it nice and easy.
Yeah, man. So I'll just go off the top of my head. So I'll tell you a little story first. The reason why we got to this prop. So I'm currently renovating my house,
Right. And did you by any chance need shellac?
Sorry.
And I said, by any chance did you need shellac?
Yeah, well, I'll get into that shortly. So so I've been renovating my house, and I was going to IKEA and stuff and looking around the kitchens, and I was like, do I really want to buy a new kitchen? Like, I don't mind just paying for a new kitchen, but there's so many second-hand kitchens, and there's probably some really good second-hand kitchens. Why don't I just get a second-hand one? Because I'm against this throwaway society stuff. If I can get something second-hand in a way which is not just obviously shit. Obviously I'm not going to buy second-hand underwear, but I'm going to buy many second-hand things which are perfectly good, like my laptop that I'm using now.
Yeah, refuse, reuse, recycle, man.
Yeah, exactly. So my laptop, deliberately, I bought it second-hand. It's like, why do I want to buy a new one from the Apple Store when it's not only about saving a bit of money, but it's like getting something that's otherwise. Well, I don't know if a MacBook Pro would end up in landfill, but you know what I mean? Just reusing, and not just avoiding this chuck away society. So anyway, I was looking at secondhand kitchens, and I found a really cool kitchen. It was like 350 euros for the whole kitchen. It was that's unbelievable deal.
That's good.
Yeah, it had really nice smeg hob. Maybe you'll see it in a vlog or something. A smeg hob and this fancy tap, this large sink. Great secondhand kitchen, all of it with an oven and everything. And 350 quid. I was like, why do I want to go to IKEA and spend 8 grand on saying new when I can buy a secondhand one? That's great. But the downside was it was like this horrible aqua blue, horrible greeny aqua blue color, and I was just like, the color has to go. It needs to be black. I'm painting it all black. But so I was googling like what is the best primer to use, because if you just paint it black, kitchen cabinets with the melamine, it will just like rub off and you will just scratch off really easily, and it will look shit within like 24 hours. It will look terrible. So you need a decent primer, and everyone was talking about this bin primer. This I can't remember the brand name, but it was like BIN. It's like, and it said synthetic shellac primer, and I was like, okay, cool. So I looked it up, and I was like, shellac's an animal product though, isn't it? But I don't know if I want an animal product. But then it was like synthetic. And I was like, oh, it's synthetic. Then it's not an animal product. So I bought some. But I was like, I just want to be sure, and I'm going to email the customer support. So I couldn't find some in Italy anywhere. I had to order it from, did it come from France or did it come from Germany? I can't remember. But anyway, I had to order it from outside of Italy. It took like a week to arrive, and super expensive postal and packaging, and non-refundable. And in the meantime, I emailed the customer support. I was like, just to confirm, this is synthetic, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, no, actually, it's not synthetic. It says synthetic, but we also actually use real shellac, which is harvested from with the lac bugs and all of that. I was like, oh.
So like you made a mistake, so but you can't refund it. So like, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, and I was looking around, and I was like, well, what else can I use? If I was to like, I can't send it back. If I was like to sell it or something, I don't know what I'm going to do with this primer.
Well, I mean, there's no difference between selling it on and using it, really, is there?
Yeah, and I was thinking about all this stuff, and I was like, well, I bought it now, and I was Googling around, and everyone was like, no, don't use other primers. You have to use shellac-based primer, otherwise it's not going to work. It's not going to stick to the cabinet. It's all going to come off, and it's going to look shit, and it's going to scratch.
I don't know, man. I think people do that all the time, though. Like, you hear people always like, it's like ball bristle brushes, like, oh, it's the only brush that'll be able to distribute oil through your hair and shit, which is just not true. But it's just like a hype and stuff like that. So like I think it happens with everything, though. You do get like hypes and stuff, like even with like, because the animal product might very well be a good product, but there will probably be a synthetic alternative that'll do the job, no problem.
Well, I thought it was synthetic, right? It said synthetic shellac.
Well, you made a mistake. That's fair enough. Like, you know, like people make mistakes, and like, yeah, like just don't, like, you just wouldn't buy it again, like, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But then, but then I was looking into it, and it seems that you don't have, you've only got like one company doing synthetic shellac, and then you got this other company, the one that I bought it from, which it says it's synthetic shellac, but it's not.
Just lie.
So if this other company is actually synthetic or not. And so the other primers don't work on the melamine because they don't stick to it properly. They don't adhere. So it seems like the only way to paint kitchen cabinets in a way that doesn't chip off, because I've used other primer on kitchen cabinets, and it chips off, right? So this is the first primer that I've ever used that doesn't chip off. It seems like the only way to do it is with shellac, right? And so I'm like, what do I think about that? As it's an animal product. What do I think about that? It's a bit weird, me painting my kitchen with this animal product. I made a mistake, but actually, what is the ethics here? So I started thinking about it. And by the way, I painted my kitchen with it, and it's awesome. It works amazingly, and the kitchen looks sick now. It's almost finished. I'll send you a picture when it's done. But yeah, so I was thinking about the ethics of it. It's not vegan because it's an animal product, but is that the sort of like entirety of it? What is veganism? Veganism is the doctrine that man should live without exploiting animals. How much exploitation has gone into this? Is it exploiting animals? What is the ethics involved? And I thought about it more, and I came to the conclusion that in the case of shellac, it doesn't seem to me to be something which is ethically problematic, and it doesn't even seem to be something which is non-vegan.
Okay, so let's kind of go into that. So, like, obviously for everyone who's watching as well, so shellac's produced Just give you like a quick, like a brief description. So Shellac's actually like it's produced by the lac bug. So the lac bug is it's like a small, there's actually, like, they're very different depending on if they're male or female. But the male and the female essentially reproduce. The male then dies. The female lays its eggs, and the larva buries itself into the bark of a tree, which then releases a resin to basically coat itself and protect itself from predators while it matures underneath the resin. It then burrows its way out of the resin, mates again, and then more bugs or like more larvae are produced. They then burrow themselves in, and you get this build-up of this naturally secreted resinous kind of material, which is like lac resin, which is then processed with alcohol, I'm pretty sure, to produce shellac. So,
Right.
so the actual process of getting the bugs onto the tree is also a kind of tentative one for vegans, I would say. So the way that what they do is they take they take females from the previous generation, and they put them in a bag and store them away. And then the next generation, so like the next time they go to, like, when it's like seasonal, when they go to produce the shellac, they tie the bag to the tree. The females then crawl out, lay their eggs, which then starts the life cycle over. About 2 life cycles in, they then end the process by harvesting the resin, right? So what they do is they take like an axe or like a little hatchet thing, chop off the branches of the tree, which are then scraped, and the resin is then scraped off, which is full of dead bugs and resin. But it's also got females in it, the live females, who are still alive from, who have then obviously been the ones that have just been born and mated with. So then they take some of them and use them as like essentially breeding stock, and the rest are then like allowed to die, and many will just die in general. And I think Peter estimated about, I think it was 100,000 die per pound of shellac.
Yeah, well, they're very small bugs. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
And there's reason to believe that these are conscious sentient creatures.
Right. So this is the thing that I've been thinking about, and this is the debate for today. Like I think maybe I might persuade you a little bit, or maybe you will persuade me a little bit. But I think both of us are on the same page with veganism. We're not going to start decapitating cows and pigs and chickens, but it's one of these grey area fringe cases in asking the question, where do we draw the line? Like Tom Reagan, for example, famously said, I don't know where we draw the line, but where you draw it, I'd advise you to draw it with pencil, because we might discover new things about these species at the other side of the line, and we might want to actually draw the line in a different place to include some of these animals that we previously thought didn't have moral value. So I'm tentatively drawing the line in pencil in a way which excludes the lac bug, for the female lac bug specifically, because you did a great job at describing the process, but there's a couple of things which I'd like to emphasize more about the process, right? So you've got, let's take the female lac bug. These are tiny, tiny, tiny bugs. Like you could fit on the palm of your hand 1 million or something of them. I don't know how many you could fit in the palm of your hand. You could fit a huge amount.
I don't think there's that. I think there are probably quite a few. You can fit quite a few. Yeah, they're really small. Yeah.
Yeah. So the male lac bug is born through an anal birth. It's born out of the anus of the female lac bug, and then the male lac bug.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the birth larvae, which are a mixture of male and female, which then burrow their way out of the resin. Am I not right about that? I thought that's how they come to be. Like, and I think you're right. Like, it's like they don't have like that, like the reproductory gland or whatever, and the anal gland are like the same thing.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but essentially, like the layman explanation is that there's some sort of anal birth in which a bug is produced, and the male bugs, yeah, they start off as like little worm type things, like tiny little larvae, wormy type maggot things, and then they mature into bugs. But the male matures into a bug which can fly about, and it can, if we want to use language that you've been more familiar using recently with like the expressing the subjectivity of the being, it can express its subjectivity by flying about and doing cool stuff that bugs do, and then it mates with the female bugs, and then it dies. So the male bugs, it's not like the shellac process kills the male bugs.
No, the male bugs all die from like naturally anyway. Like they're dead before the next cycle's produced. So before the harvest, the males have already died because like that's the way that they kind of go through the process.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not like the shellac harvesting kills the male bugs; they just die off because that's the circle of the lac bug life.
That's the life cycle. Normally about two generations of bugs, before 2 or 3, I think, before the harvest the resin.
Right. So the male bugs get to express their subjectivity, and they're not exploited by the process. The female bugs, on the other hand, though, do fall victim to the shellac harvesting process because, as you described, they excrete sticky, like this sticky substance, which becomes the shellac. That's what you want. The sticky stuff. That's what you want from the shellac process. Is all this sticky stuff that they excrete, and they do that to protect themselves.
I was going to say, I don't think it's them that excrete it, is it? It's not the female that excrete it. I thought it was the larvae that excrete it.
No, it's the female that excretes it.
Are you sure? I thought the larvae excreted it because I thought the larvae excreted it after it burrowed into the bark of the tree. I mean, it's not really that important, I suppose, but continue anyway. Sorry.
My understanding, well, it's sort of important because my understanding of it is that the female essentially just pumps out all of this sticky substance and just engulfs herself in this sticky substance, and then becomes an immobile blob, which is indecipherable which way up. That they don't have any legs, they can't move, they can't do anything. They're just this blob which exude goo, and then they die, right? They lay eggs and then they die, right? So by the time the female lac bug actually starts producing a shellac, whether or not that's harvested or not, there is no subjectivity for the lac bug to express other than just exuding slime and then dying, right? They're completely immobile. They're just a blob. They don't have like any legs or arms or identifying features other than just like a blob. And an immobile blob which doesn't do anything but pump out goo, eggs, and then dies. So I was thinking about this and I was like, well, I'm all up for not exploiting animals and allowing animals to express their subjectivity and not messing with them. But in this case, it's like, well, what subjectivity are they expressing? They're expressing nothing. They're immobile. They're just that they exude goo and then die. And then the sticks are taken and they're scraped off, and the goo's harvested. To me, it's the least morally tragic thing that I've ever heard.
I mean, like, obviously it comes down to the experience of the lac bug. It's like we could either be doing them a favor by killing them because it might be, a great deal of frustration, or that might be because it's their instinct to do so, they might actually feel contentment and then die. So it's like kind of like I'll be leaning towards the process that they don't feel suffering in that scenario, that it's less likely that they do. But then I would obviously the evidence would need to be obviously presented. Yeah, I mean, like and also like the harvesting still might cause them a great deal, like because they could be in theory immobile but feeling content within that that sticky resin, as you say. I mean, I was under the opinion that the larvae produce the resin, but I'll have to double check that. But we'll just work on the assumption that it is the female. Like in this scenario, they may be feeling contentment anyway, and then when we go and scrape them off, it might cause them angst and then death. Do you see what I mean?
Well, they don't have like any anatomy other than they're just a blob. It's almost like they're almost like bacteria at that point. It's just like a cell, not a cell, but
I don't think so. Like, I think they still have brains and stuff, man.
Maybe, but it just, for me, I'm not a biologist, so I don't know. It's just my intuition in reading about the female lac bug. Like the male lac bug, fair enough, the male lac bug like flies about and does cool stuff, right? It's got wings, it can do stuff. But the female lac bug is this blob with like, you can't even tell which way up it is because it's not got arms or legs or anything, right? It's just this like, this orb, this little blob that exudes this sticky substance which engulfs itself and immobilizes itself. It can't move, it can't do anything. All it does, yeah, as I say, it just lays a few eggs and then dies. And then the larvae like crawl out or whatever and then start the life cycle again. But the female, once the female becomes an adult female, they're immobile, they do nothing. They're just like, it's just, was it like, for me, this seems almost like akin to a bacteria at that point.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think that you can say that just because they're immobile that they're akin to a bacteria. I mean, the fact that they can have conscious experience, just because they don't move, doesn't mean that the conscious experience is necessarily like a negative. Like, and as well, like, obviously, it depends upon what we can see is I mean, it's very difficult because I think you're right with I know that the swelled up anyway to produce so many eggs, like so the swell up into these like amalgamous kind of masses and stuff like that produce their eggs and so on. There comes to a question of two things. Either I think that we're doing them a favor in the sense of killing them because their lives are one of genuine frustration, in which case, these insects are, essentially being produced, or essentially by nature forcing themselves into a very precarious situation where they can't move, they can't really do anything and feel a life of constant frustration. Or the likely alternative as well is that they feel content, safe, and die. Essentially, like the main thing would be having the resin on them would alleviate the frustration, because that would be like their willing.
So for me, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but either way, it seems contentious of whether we do this, because look, if let's say we take the females, put them on the tree, they lay the eggs, and we start this life cycle, then we perpetuate suffering if it would be better off that they weren't there, in which case we shouldn't have done it, and in which case what we've done is we've alleviated them from suffering that we've caused. But then if they don't feel suffering and they are content within that scenario, then we've prematurely ended their lives and use them as a means to an end. So it's like kind of like one way or the other. Do you know what I mean? The only other alternative would be to say that they didn't have conscious experience, but then I don't see any evidence for that because they have relatively, in terms of the capacity for awareness, is similar to the male. They just lack like wings and like a separate like the swell up so that like their thorax and shit like melds in with their abdomen and they become like this blob. But just because they're a blob doesn't mean that like they're a blob that doesn't feel.
Right. Yeah, I understand that, but I think you might be attributing too much human type emotion to this insect because although we're unable to enter the mind of a female lac bug whilst encased in goo, but it would take more calories to be in permanent distress.
I think my stream disconnected there. Sorry, guys. We're back. I don't know what happened. Stream should be back on now. I hope everyone can hear. Sorry. I don't know what happened there. Right. Foot Soldier, I'm not sure what the last thing you said. I think you said something about me anthropomorphizing the female lac bug.
Yeah. I think we might be attributing too much human type emotional quality to the tiny blob encased in goo. But even if we're not, I think there's a better argument than just raising eyebrows. I think from an evolutionary perspective, from a biological perspective, an organism which is in constant anxiety and fear is going to consume more calories than one which is just super chill. So if it's the natural thing for a female lac bug just to be encased in goo, not move, and exude slime, then surely natural selection would produce a state of affairs in which the natural way for the female lac bug to be would be a lower caloric burn and not in a state of anxiety and panic. And to even have that level of consciousness, to be able to experience anxiety and panic, is going to require more calories for a higher, for more highly developed neurophysiology.
Yeah, like you could argue that it's like, for example, like it has a brain, and so we can give it I think we can give it the benefit of the doubt that it is conscious and aware, and like subjective. And I think that we could also say that, look, nature's not perfect; it does make mistakes anyway. And then two, we could even say that, look, it may very well have the evolutionary response of not being panicked but being content but still being conscious, and it would need the consciousness maybe to essentially, problem solve enough to get itself into the situation where it can encode itself in resin and and so on.
Yeah, but once it's encoded in resin, it has no more, in terms of biological evolutionary role, it has nothing to do.
Yeah,
it doesn't have any need.
It might just
it doesn't require consciousness.
Yeah, but just because it doesn't require consciousness doesn't mean that it can just turn it off. It's like, it doesn't require consciousness anymore, so its brain it disappears. That's not how that works.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying, oh, I don't need this, I'm going to throw it out the window. What I'm saying is, from a biological perspective, less calories is better. The more calories you consume as an organism, the less you're going to succeed in terms of like biological, what I'm looking for, evolutionary pressure. Mm-hmm. There's more evolutionary pressure to consume less calories, not consume, but to use up less calories because of food supplies. Yeah. So if it had to, in addition to being an immobile blob which was exuding slime, in addition to that, it had to also think about continental philosophy. It's going to require vastly more calories than if it just had like a minimal or zero conscious state, right? So from an evolutionary perspective, you could argue it doesn't really make much sense that it would be highly conscious in a state of complete irreversible immobility.
I never said one. It depends on what do you mean by highly conscious. It could have a subjective experience in a limited sense, and it would still not necessarily I don't see the issue here. I don't understand why you think that it would just its consciousness wouldn't necessarily dissipate. Just because for all I know, it could be extremely frustrated. It could be in agony. It could be content. It could be asleep pretty much. It might just literally go to sleep. I don't know. But I don't think that we can just assume that its conscious awareness has somehow dissipated because it's now immobile.
Well, my argument is that a state of agony would be more costly calorically.
Yeah,
Do you agree or not?
well, yeah, but even if it doesn't need calories anymore, as you say, it's immobile. It doesn't do anything.
No, it
So
does need calories to exude the slime.
it's already reproduced, so there would be no push and pull factors on that beyond the fact that it excretes slime. So its consciousness might be fully, just in the sense of just excreting slime. That's all it's aware of. That might be it. And just might really love excreting the slime, or it might really hate it. It doesn't matter. That's a positive or negative experience that needs to be taken into consideration.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I think in terms of biology of it, I think it gives birth after it starts engulfing itself in slime.
I thought it was. I could have swore that it was the other way around. I'm pretty.
Because it does it to protect itself from predators, and then that's how they get. Because you can just get a bit of the tree slime, and put it back on the tree, and then the insects crawl out and hatch, and the lifestyle starts again. So they're in the eggs are in the slime.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, there's just no reason to think that it would be not conscious. Like, as its consciousness, there'd be no reason to think that it was conscious, now is not conscious because of its changed states in that respect. There's no reason to believe that it's lost its consciousness.
Right. Well, I'm not saying that it necessarily has to lose all consciousness, like the lights go out completely, but I'm just arguing that in terms of calories, having a state of extreme panic or having even a relatively elevated state of consciousness relative to the bug itself, it just would be an evolutionary disadvantage to burn calories on consciousness.
There's loads of evolutionary disadvantages. There's like animals that have definitely disadvantaged themselves time and time again, and maybe but as long as it's not disadvantaged to the point in which it's no longer reproducing, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but that's the thing. The lac bug, which is in a state of panic, will burn more calories, produce less eggs, and produce less slime, and therefore, if it produces less eggs,
why do you think? Why do you think that it would necessarily look? It could be in a state of panic, and that the state of panic might hasten the process. I have no idea. The state of panic also might reduce the process, as you say, but then the reality is these are the finer points of the experience of the lac bug that we're not going to have information of. So there's no way to assume either, and certainly not on an evolutionary profile. That has to be empirical. Evolution doesn't produce rational outcomes from which we can predict. I can't predict the next stage of evolution because it's somewhat random. It's random evolutionary traits develop, are then successful or not successful, and then we'll continue onwards. That's kind of it's usually described as extinction of the weak more than anything. It produces kind of shit adaptations, which then usually lead to the death of that animal, and then that animal doesn't reproduce, and so we have the ever finer specializations of animals into pigeonholed into smaller and smaller evolutionary traits, which manage to survive.
Right, but there's something problematic there with what you said. Firstly, you were starting to give the impression that evolution is random, and although there can be random evolutionary, let's say attempts, the actual lineage, it isn't just full of random adaptations because, as you mentioned briefly, the adaptations which aren't good result in killing the lineage of the.
I mean, if they're that bad, I mean, the thing is that you can have adaptations which are bad enough that they don't kill the animal, but not so bad that they prevent it from. Sorry, not bad enough to kill the animal, but bad enough to make its life shit. It's so, for example, arguably, the amount of anxiety, like rabbits seem to be fairly anxious creatures, right? Now their anxiety is like kind of beneficial to them because they've run away from danger, right? And it also makes them like burn more calories, as you say. Like they probably have higher like stress levels, higher like circulatory like rhythms in the hearts and stuff like that. And they're in a constant state of like, well, not in a constant state of fear, because that's not the way I've met rabbits, and they're not always like that. But they're very like quick to feel fear. Now, you could even say that the female,
beneficial.
That's
beneficial.
Yeah, that's beneficial to rabbits. But then you could find a rabbit it would be beneficial in a circumstance like to be chiller. But then rabbits in that area are still, producing in a somewhat anxious state because there hasn't been a push or pull factor, which has actually led them to being more chill. Like the environment doesn't necessarily entail that on it. Basically what I'm saying is, unless something in evolution, like in the environment, forces change, as in the animal dies before it can reproduce, there is no push or pull in relation to that trait. So they may feel anxiety, take up more calories, still survive, still reproduce, and then continue onwards. We would have no idea of knowing that, because that would require empirical investigation. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's no way to say because evolution they don't feel anxiety. That's nonsense.
Well, the thing is, you gave an example of a rabbit, but it's advantageous to the rabbit to be on its on guard constantly, so that in the likely event that a predator comes, it can roost off and go back down its hole. And the ones which are quickest to react and run away and go down their hole, whatever they do, that they're the ones that don't get eaten. And so they're the ones who can pass on their genes.
So there's a push and pull factor there, like they're being made anxious by nature because it's more advantageous for them to be anxious, right? But then if you were to put those same rabbits in a like peaceful, alternative, it wouldn't prevent them from reproducing. So like you could have you might have a larger array of rabbits. You might have the more peaceful, like the more chill rabbits, and you might have the more super anxious rabbits, but there'd be nothing killing off the anxious rabbits.
Yeah, sure, but that's how the anxious trait developed in the rabbits originally. And so you can still have stuff. There's actually a word which I've forgotten, which means something which was evolutionary advantageous at a point in history, but is no longer so. But
yeah, like our canines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, an appendix to a certain degree, I think.
I think the appendix. I think now it's like a thing for like gut bacteria or something, like a reset after infection or something like that. But I think you're right. Like
there are microbiome or something. Yeah, I actually heard about that as well. They reseeds the colon with bacteria or something.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of sad that I found that out after I lost my appendix.
Oh, really?
But I think that like take for example what canines. I think that what canines developed about like a couple of million years before us or something, from small mammals who were eating like insects. You know what I mean? And then obviously they kind of passed their way down into like apes and stuff, who kind of use them but not really, and it's more of like a show of force. And then like made their way to us, who then just really don't need them at all, because even when we're eating meat, it's all cooked anyway, so it's like super soft compared to like when we would have needed them to like eat something that would have otherwise required a canine. And even for defense, it's not like you can growl at someone with tiny little human teeth. So like it's
I don't even see many canines about on human mouths anyway. Like how many real canines do you see on a human mouth?
I know, it's just a slightly more pointy incisor, really.
Yeah.
But
it's not hardly a canine.
No, it's hardly. I agree. I think cats have bigger canines than us, and they're not even like a meter, But yeah, like I think that, as you can see, that there are like byproducts of evolution. I think that's saying that whether it's, you might be right. Like maybe in a few generations, like the female lac bug might even just go. It might even go in an unconscious state. I just don't have the information to say that it does. I don't know whether it's in a state of pain. I don't know whether it's in a state of pleasure. When it's like when the excretion's done, it may very well die. But obviously females need to survive in order to reproduce the next generation, and obviously you have the larvae as well. I think, for example, the larvae who have yet to mature, I think they also die. So, or is it like, or do they intervene just before the eggs are laid? I think they intervene before the eggs are laid, don't they? But
I'm
yeah,
not 100% sure, and it might not be that clear cut. I
yeah.
mean, it might not be that accurate. So there may be some maggots killed as well.
Well, you see I mean, that this is the issue. Like, it just seems an unnecessary like production of like possible like suffering and death that we could kind of do without. I think like the problem is as well, like when we talk about like this resin being quite useful, I think it's like one of the biggest, like, was it necessity is the mother of invention, right? I think the reality of the situation is, unless we're pushed to do something that takes us out of the status quo, we're happy enough to keep the status quo the way it is. Very good example, I think, from what I'm aware, is like China and clay. Like, it invented ceramic rather relatively quickly, China, comparatively to its neighbors and the most of the world. And so it was very content with ceramic, whilst we didn't have the equivalent, and so produced glass. And glass obviously led to numerous other inventions, which kind of like made us like technologically, saying us, like, I mean, like the like Roman, like Western kind of, like, I think Egypt actually might have been the first place to produce glass, but I'm not sure about that. But but like that era, that like area of like history was like like pushed forward by the necessity of needing glass and even desiring glass for like aesthetics. Well, the aesthetic of China was to appreciate the ceramic. And so like when I say like necessity is the mother of invention, I think like even with the resin, like you probably find that if we stopped using it, then something synthetic would come and take its place relatively quickly.
Right. Yeah, mate. I think you could probably make something out of a mixture of epoxy and I don't know, like some sort of. I guess you could make it. It probably already exists, to be honest. So I don't know.
And it might just even drop in price. That'd be like more people producing it, like obviously lower, greater supply, higher demand, so on. Just prices drop.
Yeah. Before I forget, the word which I couldn't think of a minute ago when you had an evolutionary part, which used to be necessary but no longer is. The word that I was looking for is vestigial. If you've got like a vestigial organ, it means one that is no longer needed anymore. So yeah, that was in the context of the rabbits we were discussing that. But yeah, to go back to, I don't think we fully closed off my caloric argumentation for the consciousness of the lac bug, because we decided that the rabbits could have anxious rabbits, and then you could put them in a chill environment, and maybe then we get a mixture of chill and anxious rabbits when there's no predators around to eat them. Maybe on Rabbit Island, for example, there's a mixture of chill and anxious rabbits. But it still doesn't detract from my argumentation in the case of the lac bugs, because the lac bugs who are not anxious and in a state of panic will produce more offspring and get eaten less by predators, because the two things that they do when they are surrounded by goo, immobilized, is produce eggs and produce the sticklac, the sticky goo.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but here's the thing: like, you could make the same argument, the exact same argument, to say that an anxious lac bug, like a lac bug which was not producing resin in haste out of fear of being eaten, wouldn't produce resin fast enough, and so would be more likely to be eaten. So you could argue that the more anxious lac bug had been in history more evolutionarily capable, and so like they're actually perpetually terrified of being consumed by predators.
I think evolutionary speaking, or like biologically speaking, it would be more. What's the word that I'm looking for?
Advantageous?
No, the word I'm looking for is parsimonious. It would be more parsimonious to have the adaptation that the lac bug simply exuded more goo than to be in a state of panic, which then resulted in it wanting to produce more goo.
But it doesn't have to like have one single outcome. You could have both. Both could be simultaneous. Like the lac bugs that survive are the ones that produce the most goo, and the ones that are the most anxious. That's just the way evolution works. Like not one. It doesn't have to be the same exact adaptation. It can have the same results, and that be like basically the push and pull factor. So then the ones that survive the best are the ones that produce the most and are anxious, or even just say like, the ones that like, survive the best are well, it depends upon the rate in which it's produced. I just don't think that we can make really what is an empirical claim on this matter.
Well, the thing is here, the lac bug that produces the most goo is going to be the one that exerts or burns the least calories on consciousness, the conscious activities, right? Because the bigger your brain, the bigger the caloric drain, the less calories allotted to producing slime and eggs.
Yeah, but I mean, like, so I would say that that's fair enough. But like, like the size of the brain's not changing for one, so there's not gonna be a massive change. If you talk about the disposition and like, let's say like the amount of like energy that's burned from like an anxious state versus a non-anxious state, I don't know how big of a difference that would be for the animal. Like, I don't even know what kilojoules an hour or whatever, kilocalories an hour that would be required. I think that like that's just it's hypothetical. And whether it would have like that big of an impact on its life anyway. Like this is all very speculative and empirical. That's all I'm saying. Like this isn't an argument. This is at best a theory.
Well, I can provide links for you if you want. Like there's an article here. Scientists discover link in brain between anxiety and weight loss. Okay,
that's fair enough. But what you have, like humans experiencing anxiety and weight loss versus the evolutionary capability of an anxious lac bug versus a non-anxious lac bug, and whether it's actually had like effects to the push and pull factors of the experience in relation to evolution has changed the experience of the female lac bug is like the most speculative, like unbelievably specific theory on like evolutionary was it female lac evolutionary biology. Do you know what I mean? Come on, there's no way we're gonna find that out. I don't know what to Google for that.
Yeah, it is somewhat speculative, but I don't think it's like just wild nonsense. I think it's reasonable.
I think it's reasonable. I don't think it's not reasonable. I just think that it's totally theoretical.
Yeah, but what are we going to do? Like, go and talk to lac bugs?
Well, I mean, if we cared that much, I would say that what we need to do is just have a look at the metabolic rate of lac bugs. We could probably do that, but then, even then, we could look at the behavior, maybe scans, and then even then, look, at the end of the day, this is all unnecessary anyway. It's like, do we need to do this? And even look at it like this: if they're not anxious and they're in a state of docility and they're content, then killing them ends that contentment and impedes the subjectivity of their will, in which case their deaths are bad. And if they are in a state of anxiety, then killing them might be good, but then making more of them would be bad. So either way, it's kind of like pincered. There's no way to there's just no reason to produce more of them.
Well, there are a few reasons, right? So firstly, this assumes that the only thing in the picture is the lac bug itself, right? So if we're going to say that the lac bug matters morally to the point that we should alter what we do based upon the lac bug, then either we have to say that all animals which are in the circle of moral consideration are equal, or we would have to rank it a bit. So if you stepped on a lac bug, it would be as tragic as running a human child over, for
No, I
example.
think that you can make arguments in terms of like subjectivity. So you could like, okay, we respect everyone's subjectivity, all animals, but I have a greater responsibility to my family, and then like my friends, and then maybe like the area in which I live, and then maybe like humans as a whole or something, and that be totally fine in terms of normative ethics versus meta ethics. It's like like for example, if let's say the like I made this example with Marty, right? Let's say the Chinese decided one day to invade Britain, it would not be wrong to fight them off if like that was what they were deciding to do, and you couldn't stop the war, and it was the only way to defend your family and so on like that. Fighting them off and taking lethal force against them would not be wrong in self-defense, regardless of them having the same value as you. So even if you had to kill, let's say, 10 times as many people as your family, you would be justified in doing so because you are morally accountable to your family, regardless of the value that is being lost in terms of the invaders.
Yeah, I can agree with all that.
Yeah, so in which case, like, we can say that, like, we have a great deal of moral responsibility. When we talk about deliberately impeding the subjectivity of another, so let's say us invading China, that's a different set of that's a different scenario. Don't do it. You don't invade China, regardless of the amount of like you it might benefit your society and culture to a great degree. It doesn't justify you impeding the subjectivity of those Chinese people and taking it upon yourself to take from them in order to materially supply yours. And so what I would say is that, like, look, in terms of your responsibilities, you're most responsible for your family and so on like that, even arguably more responsible for you're responsible for your species more than another species. But that doesn't mean that you're justified in taking the life of another species and, doing something which could have otherwise been prevented, especially if it's something like, culture, tradition, money, things like that.
Right, but it's not so clear cut because let's say, for example, driving. Many people drive. I don't like driving, but I often have to drive if I'm like transporting large objects. I've got a van and have to transport them. Then generally, when you drive, you kill insects, right? Larger and more conscious than lac bugs.
Well, we don't know more conscious. Like, I think that's speculative. But yeah, you kill insects.
Yeah, or I don't know if it's so speculative, like a lac bug, like the female lac bug, as we've already said, is like this immobile blob covered
Just because
in
it's
slime.
immobile doesn't mean it's not conscious, and just because it can't fly doesn't mean it's not conscious.
Right, but anyway, like tiny, you almost can't see it with your eye. Tiny blob, immobile, can't move, doesn't have arms or legs or anything like that. Versus like a bumblebee, for example. Like, there's no comparison to me. Would you agree?
Sorry, could you please say that again?
Yeah, like if we compare the lac bug to something like a bumblebee, like the female lac bug, which is immobile, doesn't have arms or legs, is just a blob that is covered in slime, can't move, compared to a bumblebee. But right, surely a bumblebee is, we're gonna say the bumblebee is more conscious, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any reason to say that the bumblebee's more conscious. Like, and I don't think that, like, look, I'm not a reductionist in terms of consciousness anyway. I'm not going to say, like, oh, it's all reducible to the brain state. Like, I don't believe that. I don't think that's...
Are you, like, now arguing for some sort of dualism?
No, I'm not arguing for dualism. I'm actually more, like, hylomorphic. I just don't think it's reducible. Like, I'm just not a reductionist, a material reductionist.
Well, what does hylomorphic mean?
Hylomorphic means, like, a combination of causes. So that, like... there could be so in terms of consciousness, like, consciousness can be a mixture of certain like metaphysical properties that are not simply reducible to the matter from which like they may even be dependent upon to exist. So you could say, like, consciousness is not dependent upon the size of a brain, for example, or the complexity of well, maybe not, but maybe like is not totally reducible to the complexity of an individual's brain, or like how many lobes they have. And I think there's evidence to even point this out. Like, look, like there's people who've lost like 90% of their brains, and they've got the majority of their IQ, like IQs of like over 130 and stuff like that, and they've lost like 90% of their brains, like their cerebrum and stuff.
The correlation in brain size to IQ is only a very loose one.
Yeah, but it's I'm not saying that is. I mean, that they're still fully functional and conscious beings. You would think that the reduction in the size of their brain may reduce the amount in which they're conscious, but it seems to not have any effect. And I'm saying like the same thing probably could be said about like animals, like the reason, like how conscious they are and how aware of value, like how subjectively aware of value they are, may not be tied into the size of their brain. And so saying like a bumblebee is more conscious than a lackbug, I have no idea. I don't even know how to qualify that.
Well, the thing is, I don't just look at the bumblebee and say it's bigger, thus it's smarter or something. That's not
No,
what
it's like it flies around, and so it must be more conscious. But then I think that's a jump. But like, there's no reason, like as well. Like obviously, we have the activities that the lackbug had to do before it got to that state, but also what it's conscious of, the values of its experience, maybe even centered around just the feeling of excretion. It might very well just have like an on-off switch of good and bad. If it's not excreting lac resin, then it's bad, and if it is excreting, then it's good. It might literally just be that, and but it doesn't matter to me. Like none of that actually matters at all. Like in terms of the experience of the individual, it doesn't matter if it's more or less complex. It doesn't diminish the value of that experience.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, bees have personalities. Bees have advanced navigation.
I know, but I don't really care anyway. Like, I mean, like if someone had no personality, didn't have anything but like, you know, let's say like someone didn't have anything but the feeling of hot and cold, and cold was bad and hot was good, like to like relative human standards, right? You know, they want to be warm and comfortable, but that's all that really matters to them, right? Then we'll make sure that they're warm and comfortable. And if that's all they can experience, I don't care. Make sure they're warm and comfortable. That's the moral imperative around that being. Do you see what I mean?
Well, I would diverge with you there. I'd say if there was an organism that could only like feel hot and cold, and that was like the limit of their entire experience, I wouldn't call that consciousness. I would say they're not conscious.
But if they could have conscious, and what I'm pointing out is like conscious awareness of the experience of hot and cold, so they have a subjective evaluation of like pain and pleasure, which they go, oh, like it's like it's a feeling that they experience, that they're aware of.
Right, so we're not just talking about a thermometer, we're talking about I'm talking about can actually feel.
Yeah, like what would usually describe as animals. Like it doesn't have to be like even self-aware. It just has to have awareness of this positive and negative experience, which is actually in reference to heat and like hot and cold.
Right, because the thing is, that there's going to be like some psoriasis paradox, which is going to be difficult to point to an exact threshold. But there's going to be a very hazy line.
I agree. I think that so far the evidence that we have is in relation to two things, and that's behaviorism and materialism, and that's all we've really got. So like I think that consciousness is in reference to material, as I've said, but isn't determined by it. So I would expect that the existence of a high complex enough like material like organism, like some sort of neurological structure, is usually tied to consciousness. It's just not reducible to that. Like it's not the only thing that's required. From what I've just seen of like neurological studies. Also, I think that like consciousness may exist like in like a variety of different like for example, like you could have like I think octopi are conscious given the neurological complexity. Like obviously Mim explains like there's a ganglia that they have where it's like kind of smaller brain structures, the same thing that insects have, but like octopi have like ridiculous amounts of them. And are actually like, you know, even highly intelligent in terms of animal standards.
Octopi are actually intelligent creatures.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with like this is the thing, like this is what I would say with the insects. Like I think that the octopi are probably aware of like maybe a greater amount of stimuli than the insects. I think that humans are aware of probably a greater amount of stimuli than many other animals. And then obviously self-awareness is like an awareness of one's own awareness, which is like another level. I don't know. There's probably some sort of infinite regress on that where we just fall into like existential doom, but like, or like bliss. I don't know, whichever way you go. But like the thing is that like in terms of consciousness, I think that obviously there is a material relation, and I think that we're pretty much justified in saying that it's linked to either there has to be a behavioral foundation on that, which is why we've associated it with brains. It's why like most neuroscientist experiments are like, how do you feel now that this part of your brain is like this? And like we just ask people like, we think you're conscious. Like, what do you think? And I think that it's the same thing with epistemics. Like most of epistemics has been built off, like materialism itself is a epistemic theory that's been built off communication with other beings from which we've assumed are conscious before we've even gotten to the point of talking about what consciousness is and so on. So I would say that behaviorism and materialism are pretty much the foundations for what we have with consciousness. And in the case of like animals, we'd usually see that they have certain they act and they have behaviors, and they also have material components which we would link to consciousness, which is like brains.
Right. Yeah. Where are we in the conversation? So I think I'm just skeptical of in terms of the evolutionary argument that I gave. I'm skeptical that there's any necessity for the lac bug to have the type of consciousness that we would consider morally, right? So I agree with you that there doesn't necessarily need to be any correlation between the size of a brain and the level of consciousness, and there doesn't have to be. You don't have to be able to do cool stuff to be considered morally. For example, if someone can't juggle plates or like do cool dance moves, it doesn't mean that we get to kill them and they're not considered morally. So I agree with you a lot here in this conversation. The disagreement is coming from where, like, in how much are we going to consider the lac bug morally when there's no evolutionary pressure for it to have any consciousness whatsoever. And the likeliness, although it's speculative, the likeliness is that it probably isn't in any state of consciousness that we would consider morally. So yeah, we can, like, the thing is, we can extend the precautionary principle to some degree, but
Moral
there are
hazard.
additional reasons why we might think that it's actually a good idea to have shellac production, right? Because the thing is, like, firstly, when you've got like milk production or something, we've got highly sentient animals.
I don't believe in the sentience hierarchy. I think that's bullshit. I don't think there's any way to qualify that.
Yeah, or highly deeply like they've got personalities. They are very aware, right?
We know they're conscious.
Yeah, and they're tortured. They're milked, and then they're killed, and then we eat them.
That's wrong. Yeah.
With the lac bugs, it's like the male lac bugs live natural, completely free lives, just like in nature, right? The female lac bugs basically do their thing, whatever that is, until they are immobilized by their own slime anyway. So it's not like...
But obviously the immobilization is either positive or negative, which we have no idea of. And you've made the argument that it wouldn't be negative, which means that it could be a state of contentment, in which case they're happy to be secreting this, and then killing them prematurely would be ending the positive experience of their lives, and so would be wrong. And then if they are otherwise, in a state of angst, then ending their lives may genuinely be freeing them from the the frustration and agony that they experience, but then producing more lac bugs would be negative. So it's like, in what way are we justified in this production, though? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I'll get into the additional factors now,
and then just to point out with the moral hazard point, which I think is a really important aspect to go down. If it's contentious whether these are subjective conscious experiencing agents, then we should patients even, then we should act on the side of moral hazard. And I think that like if we can do something with, you know, like plant alternatives, synthetic alternatives, or something like that, that isn't likely to produce more harm than otherwise, which I don't think necessarily is, considering how many lac bugs are actually killed in this process and must always be killed. Like you can't produce them. They can't produce it without the lac bugs in this scenario. So I just don't see why, as a vegan, we can come to the conclusion that using these bugs is justified. Because, like, if you're right and they weren't conscious and we could prove that, then I'd be like, all right, well, fair enough. We've proven they're not conscious. But until we've proven that they're not conscious, and we have reasonable doubt to believe they are conscious, and the experience is either positive or negative, and either way, it's morally hazardous. Why you know what I mean? Why would we engage in that?
Well, the thing is, one thing that we've maybe overlooked slightly is by the time the sticklac is harvested, the female bugs are dead anyway, right?
No, they're not.
They lay their
No, they're not.
Well,
because
most of them are, right?
there's quite a few of them that are dead, but then the larvae are alive, and the female bugs have to extract quite a few female bugs. I'm pretty sure they do it at the point in which the females have just either been impregnated or the larvae are there. So either way, there's always, I think it's before that they've laid their eggs, because they take those females and use them to essentially like start the next life cycle. I'm pretty sure.
Pick up a bit of goo and put it on a tray, like in a bag.
Well, like obviously there has to be, like, I don't know how many females they need, and I know that they basically tie like a bag full of like females to the tree to start the life cycle. So I don't know how much they need to do this, and like obviously in each scenario they've got to do it every tree. I don't know how much they need, right? I don't know how many females they need. It's one of those things. But like obviously either way, like what we know then is that the females are alive. And haven't even burrowed into the started excreting yet, because they haven't even laid their eggs. So like in this scenario, there's no reason to believe that these creatures aren't consciously aware and suffer.
I see what you're saying, but I think the process is such that they're, like, by definition, like, they're already immobilized blobs covered in slime. I don't know if they are. Because I don't think they've started, because they've just been impregnated by the males, I think, but when they're quote unquote harvested, you know. I don't think they pick individual little bugs.
No. I don't think so. I just think that they scrape the branches, and then some of it gets processed and all of the bugs on that part die, and some of it just gets stuffed in a bag.
Yeah, but that's already, like, they're already in the immobilized blob state.
Not necessarily. I mean, they could be on top of the resin.
Yeah, but then there wouldn't be enough resin for them to harvest.
Because they do a couple of life cycles first. They do like 2 or 3 life cycles. That's why there's so much resin, because they basically let them do this a couple of times and then the harvest.
Yeah, right. But if you did it prematurely, where they were still exposed and not immobilized blobs, then you wouldn't have enough lac.
But you're talking about like the 3rd generation or 4th generation of female or whatever. So like they need those females anyway to make the next generation. Do you know what I mean? Like for the next like harvest. So there's always going to have to be alive females in order to produce the next harvest anyway. It's whether they're in that gelatinous blob state or not. And I think they've just been impregnated and haven't started the production of Either way, it's either this way. Either they've just been impregnated, in which case they haven't laid their eggs, and they're going to be used, which I think makes the most sense because they need to be used for the next, the next life cycle, or they've produced larvae which are now going to die. So it's either one or the other.
Well, they're in the sort of like they're in the lacquer because I've seen a picture of it. They put that on the tree. It's not like they're not exposed. They're like in the lacquer, right?
I thought they tie a bag around to the tree, and then the larvae. I was under the impression that they tie a bag to the tree, and then the larvae crawl out of the bag, burrow their way into the. This is what I thought. Burrow their way into the branches, then they cover themselves in the goo. But I mean, I'm not entirely sure. So like whatever. Like it could be that the females crawl onto the branches, burrow themselves in, and then start releasing the goo, like the resin. So I don't know. But either way, like there is definitely going to have to be like one or two, like as like one or the other. It's either we're killing the offspring or we're killing the females. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think it's more like killing the offspring, but I'm not sure. We'd have to get a biologist who specializes in invertebrates in here to.
Yeah, I have no idea. I would have expected that we're killing the females and only keep some of them because obviously we need the next life cycle. So it wouldn't make sense to just have loads of offspring unless we use the offspring to like we just kind of kept them in like a jar which they reproduce. And then, like, the next females will like give them so long. So there's females that are impregnated and then put them on a tree.
I think it's quite low tech. They just like scrape off some shit and put it on another tree.
But yeah, I mean, it would be. A jar is quite low tech as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that. I think it's low tech in the sense that it's either like they let them have a life cycle, like they basically let them have one life cycle in a bag. But I don't think it works like that. I think they need the tree. And I think the actual resin they produce is dependent upon the tree, which they burrow into.
Because they extract the sap. That's why they're on the tree in the first place.
Yeah, so I think that it would have to be the females, the pregnant females that were, essentially would scrape some off, put them in a bag, and then the rest just gets, essentially murked in the process, like of making the shellac.
Well, the last things that I want to discuss, the fact that the only reason, so shellac, most of it is produced in like India and Thailand, but mostly India. I think India is the biggest market by far, and it's produced in such a way that there's like agricultural workers do the shellac production, and everyone has got nice jobs out of it, and it's good because it's good for the people there. It provides them with an income, and one of the biggest things is that not only is it provided with an income, because that's not an amazing argument on its own, but the fact that if everyone was to boycott shellac in the world, and the market had to stop, I'm not just saying boo-hoo, the people lose their jobs, because whatever, that happens a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's the real life scenario of the people that are now unemployed, the whole areas, the local economies crumble, that kind of thing.
Well, not only that, I was going to say that those agricultural labourers, they essentially act as ecology conservationists. Like they preserve the natural ecology for the shellac production.
Yeah, and they keep that area, like a lot of it's being deforested in the first place to move for animal agriculture and like crop production. And the only reason it's not being cut down really in the grand scheme of things under capitalism is because of the money invested in shellac, really.
Exactly. So basically, if you stop shellac production, you're just going to bulldoze all the wildlife.
Yeah, I mean it's quite sparse anyway. If you've ever seen them, like it's actually quite sparse. There's not very much going on there. Like it's really like quite desolate. It's like one or two trees. It's like And whereas before there used to be like wildlife live there, like tigers and stuff, there's nothing really there anymore. It's just the trees, and the trees themselves aren't like bustling with life. Really, the
Yeah, they do look a bit like wimpy.
yeah, they just looked a bit like, yeah, that's a bit like not okay, really. But the thing is that
Yeah,
like
spider without trees.
and I think, like, to be honest, I would be surprised if they would probably shoot down. They'd be more like to shoot birds and stuff like that to protect the the lac production. You know, I think like at the end
No,
of the
no,
day,
I don't think they shoot birds and stuff because like so basically
I guess the lac would protect them enough anyway, wouldn't it? I guess that's the point, isn't it?
yeah, and the lac bugs are actually deemed a pest animal. So when lac bugs invade agricultural crops, it devastates the agricultural crop. Oh, the tree fruit. I think they're going to devastate tree fruits and nuts and stuff like this. So they're actually deemed a pest, and so it's actually an interesting situation where they're propagated deliberately because to basically harvest what is essentially their shit, right? So it's almost like a manure thing, right? So if you weren't gonna,
I mean, you could like obviously manure. You could have manure production that wasn't unethical. Really, you could just have a bunch of cows in a field that were eating grass, and then you go and grab that shit, and then that would be okay. Really, there's no like, but then like, there's nothing that would necessarily entail that we couldn't have a symbiotic with relationship with animals.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But then with the lac bug, it's like, no, some of them are going to die, and that's unavoidable. And that's what we deem that as an acceptable risk, that we are harming these animals for the production of shellac, which for the most part isn't necessary. I mean, like, it's a lot of the time it's used as like confectionery kind of like shiny casings and stuff, like shiny what's the word, like it's like the shiny coatings for like sweets. And like I know that like there's loads of other vegan shiny coatings for sweets like that use different like resins and stuff, and like different not resins even, but like artificially produced like coatings. It just seems that it's just like it's cheap, it's pretty good for like the things that it does, and so we'll use it because we can. It doesn't seem like, oh right, like it's the only thing that we can do, and it's like, it's a necessary evil kind of thing. It's like, no, it's not like that at all.
Yeah, well, I feel like it seems in this case with my kitchen, going back to the original story that I was telling.
But my kitchen.
It seems like shellac is pretty much the only thing you can do to get a second-hand kitchen and paint it in a decent color.
But I mean, you just said there was like artificial ones. There was just like you picked the wrong company.
I'm skeptical. There seems to be only one other company, but so I bought synthetic shellac, right? But it wasn't. And the other one, I'm pretty sure if I wrote to them, it'd be like, oh yeah, it's just shellac as well, because it doesn't. You don't. I've researched it a bit, and I don't think you can actually get actually synthetic shellac. Or if you did, it wouldn't even be called synthetic shellac. It would probably just be like resin paint or something. I don't know, resin primer, like, or epoxy primer or something. So anyway, what I was going to say is, firstly, so to sort of wrap it up a bit, because we've been going for a while now. So I'll just make a list of.
You can use like oil-based primers. I just created a quick Google search. You could use like oil-based primers, and then latex is okay, but then it can cause the wood to swell up or something.
No, because kitchen cabinets aren't wood; they're
MDF.
chipboard coated with melamine.
Is it like MDF or?
No, it's chipboard, but then which is basically so MDF is sawdust and glue. Chipboard is like chips of wood and glue, but you don't actually you don't interface with the real wood, because there's like a melamine plastic coating over it. So if you go to the kitchen, look at a countertop, or look at any of the drawers, unless they're actually real wood drawers or doors, they're going to be melamine. And the tabletop, the countertop, unless it's like real stone or real wood, is going to be melamine. So that is a type of plastic, and you can't paint over that with a latex paint. You can't paint over it with an oil-based primer.
could you not like cover it in something first, then like, so for example, I know a lot of people like in the sort of furniture reproduction things, they cover stuff in like wallpaper, or then there's like to make them look nice, and then there's also like you could cover it in like maybe it's like a plastic vinyl or something like that you could use to like a sticky plastic thing that you could use as just like a covering, like self-adhesive,
like a vinyl wrap.
yeah, like something, I don't know, like a self-adhesive kind of thing, and then maybe
Yeah,
even
to be honest, like these are things that you could probably possibly do, but to be honest, like the only real sensible thing to do is to repaint it using a shellac primer as the adhesion.
I mean, I can't comment on that because I'm not a tradesman. If any tradesman in the chat knows whether like there is an alternative here, please speak up. I mean, like, I don't know if the oil-based ones would work. The oil-based primers would work. But you know, as you say, like if there's a synthetic alternative, and then if there is no alternative, then I guess like really, I guess it comes down to whether it would be justified. Like would it be justified in using this if there's no alternative for this specific, issue? I'm leaning to say that it wouldn't be justified in the sense that it would be. I mean, it would be vegan regardless because it would be possible and practicable. So if it was justified, it would still be vegan. But then it would just be that the animals are being harmed, but there's no way to prevent that harm. But it seems to me that like there are ways that you could go around preventing it that are just kind of inconvenient.
Well, I think what it comes down to is if you use anything else, it will just scratch and chip off. So you will just throw away the kitchen, buy a new kitchen. So if you want to buy a second-hand kitchen and repaint it so it doesn't look shit, then you sort of need to use the shellac paint. So I'm not arguing necessarily for like sweeps with shellac on it or like shellac now polish or whatever the hell that is. Like, just why do you need that? But if you actually like do need a shellac based primer like I did, as I've laid out in this conversation, I don't see a huge moral issue with it. So what we would also now have to consider, so we've talked about the ecological conservation of the shellac production areas. The people who are working the land would all lose their jobs and the environment would be bulldozed. And we've talked about how I made an argument from an evolutionary perspective how it would be unlikely that they would be so conscious because of the argument from the caloric expenditure. And yeah, there's no real alternative for repurposing a second-hand kitchen. And so the last thing which I'd want to touch upon would be the fact that if you do want to buy a second-hand kitchen instead of buying new because you don't want the throwaway society thing, like you don't want it to end up in landfill, you actually want to sort of reuse stuff, repurpose stuff, and upcycle stuff, and not always just like go to IKEA and buy the first like brand new thing. Then you have to take into consideration that if I'm not going to use the shellac primer, then I'm going to go to IKEA and buy a new kitchen. And I don't care if it's 7,000-8,000 euros more expensive. It's more like the kitchen that's new. Think about the CO2 produced in the manufacturing process. Think about the plastics used in the production process and the chipboard, the amount of bugs that are ground up in the chipboard to make the chipboard for everything that you buy there. All of the bugs killed by the transportation of in the lorries transporting all the brand new kitchen stuff. Think about all of the stuff that goes into creating a new kitchen and all the bugs that might get killed in that process and all the CO2 that might be released or industrial chemicals that might be released which might kill more bugs or change the environment in a way which kills more bugs. So it's like on one hand you've got use shellac-based primer, reuse something, don't let it go to landfill, do something great for the environment. Shellac preserves the environment, it's conserving the Indian wildlife and ecology in the shellac production areas and giving people jobs. And yeah, a few female lac bugs die who are immobile, tiny little blobs covered in goo that can't move. And I don't think they're conscious because of the argument I already gave. But the alternative is, okay, I'm just going to buy a new kitchen, and this old kitchen is going to go to landfill when it's perfectly good if it was just painted and all the things I've just listed. So I really feel like not only is it considering the morality of or the consciousness of the lac bug, which I'm very eyebrow raised on anyway, but it's also like, what is the alternative? The alternative is buying a brand new kitchen and and throwing away and putting the old one in landfill. So, and all of the problems that involves in the production of the new kitchen.
Okay. I guess I did a quick Google search. It said something about melamine primers or something could be used. I don't know.
Well, there's no such thing. I think it's a primer for melamine.
I have no idea. I'm certainly not. That it just basically said that any melamine primer or whatever. I don't know. I have no idea. So yeah, I see what you're saying. So this is essentially my point. Like, one, even if I accepted everything that you've just said, shellac still wouldn't be vegan, because it really would only be vegan under a given context, rather than the actual product and production being vegan. You'd say, like, look, if there was no other alternative and it was necessary to prevent other suffering and death, then shellac would be vegan, and that's fair enough. But it's like, right, well, given the context of any animal product, it could be vegan in that respect. It doesn't make the product itself vegan. It's like when we talk about shellac, really we're talking about all of its uses and not this one particular use, which is fairly niche, if I'm honest. And then obviously it doesn't exclude the possibility that there is vegan primers, or the possibility of vegan primers, if we remove this product and didn't support it anymore anyway. And so the continued support of this product may be producing the circumstance in which we can only use shellac, because it's essentially the cheapest, most viable and available source of these primers. Then I would just say, like, look, like, even the industry, it probably wouldn't even survive if it was only being used in these like very niche cases. You're probably not going to have a very, like, the industry itself is not the most lucrative one in the first place, from what I'm aware. And if it wasn't for industries that were like, buying it for food products, we're using it for nails, like for like women's nails and stuff like that, like as a coating for that. Like, they're like the main uses of shellac, from what I'm aware, not in industry primers. And then, so I don't even see whether the industry would survive even if we did cut this out. So we might end up just being without it anyway and needing a vegan alternative. And then obviously this is the whole conversation is based off the fact that we have reason to believe that the lac bugs are conscious, subjective creatures who would be harmed by the production, who are harmed by the production of this process, and so would feel either pain in the sense that when their life cycle is utterly awful and nature has put them in a state of like pain and misery from which we shouldn't perpetuate, or we kill many of them and end the state of what would otherwise be in contentment or relative like happiness, to end their lives prematurely. And I think the reality of the situation is that we should just probably not engage in this at all, in any ways. Stop producing more lac bugs to either die or needing to be rescued. And in which case, like, we can use vegan alternatives. You said yourself, there might be a vegan alternative already, but you need to have a little bit more research into that. Might be a bit inconvenient, but fair enough. You can still not have to buy the brand new kitchen. And I'm not advocating anyone buy a brand new kitchen. There should be a vegan alternative. And if there's not, then we need to essentially push the industry in that direction anyway. So just because there is no alternative now doesn't mean there won't be an alternative if we do begin the boycott anyway. So there's no need to say that, look, we're always going to have to buy, brand new kitchens and so on. And, as I say, there might be you might be able to cover them in plastic vinyl. You might be able to use a different primer. There's other alternatives to like look into, and maybe it might take a little bit more research, but maybe write a blog post about it or something, man. Do the research and educate us all. Make a video on like how to paint your cupboards, like that kind of thing. Turn it into something that's profitable for you as well. So yeah, I think that the moral hazard's too high, and I think that we shouldn't perpetuate the idea that shellac is vegan, especially since it would only be quote unquote vegan in a very niche contextual circumstance, namely buying a second-hand kitchen and needing to paint it with a shellac-based primer. So yeah.
Nice one, man. What do you? Does that constitute closing statements, or shall I respond to a couple of things you said?
Well, I thought we were closing, but it's up to you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that I have already researched this, man. And it seems that there aren't any real good, viable alternatives for repurposing old kitchens, and the industry. A lot of woodworkers use shellac, man. Like in woodworking industries and primers, like that's where most of, like, in my understanding, most of the shellac's getting used. It's not the sweets, and yeah, that was the main thing. Yeah. So I guess we've given our closing points. I guess I was going to recap, but I guess already, mentioned that evolutionary argument from caloric expenditure, lack of alternatives. Buying a new kitchen is gonna everything involved with that, and chucking the old one away, and the Indian shellac conservation areas going to be bulldozed and everyone lose their job. So I don't know. I see what you're saying, man. That we should really be maybe extend the precautionary principle to these female shellac blob bugs, but I think in this case, as Tom Reagan says, be careful where you draw your line and draw it in pencil. For now, I feel like I'm drawing the line in a way which excludes lac bugs from what I consider to be
arbitrarily draw the line. I think that's the issue.
But based upon my evolutionary argument.
But the evolutionary man, that is not biology. Like, I'm not even going to pretend that that's biology. That was just like, I have a biological theory, and it also happens to allow me to paint my cabinets. That is not biology. Unless you get me some empirical, like, biology's a science, man. That was not science.
Biological cupboard painting theory.
But thanks for the debate, man. It's been interesting. I know Marty. He wanted to ask you a couple of questions and stuff. Maybe like obviously once this has ended now, and he's like the philosophy chat. If you know him, nice guy, philosopher, knows considerable amount more than me about evolutionary biology and consciousness, and I think he had something that he wanted to kind of chime in with. I don't think
sure.
But like obviously we can close this off now, and then you can chat with War Marty.
Sure. In terms of the debate on Ethereum, maybe Stone wants to jump in and wrap the debate up, and then we can take questions.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good, guys. Great debate, and thank you as always. I appreciate it. So I didn't hear a vocal concession from either of you. So at this point, I guess we can pick which voting poll we want to go with. So are you guys thinking the 3-question or just the regular?
I do not care.
Yeah, I'd say just like the up and down.
Gotcha. All right, well then I guess we'll go with the up and down. So I'll put that in debate chat. Everyone's eligible to vote except for Marty, Master Uruguay, and Moonface Buddha. Everyone else can vote. If you could, I'd appreciate it. And also we have one question from someone in the audience to you, Perspective, if you don't mind.
Yeah, Tomato, I can see it. How is perspective philosophy drawing a line between these creatures and complex plants like fungi, etc.? I would say probably neurological density. Tomato, I think it's probably the only thing that I can say is, like, in terms of behavior, we have no reason to believe that like plants engage in non-reflexive behaviors as well. I've only seen plants engage in sort of like reflexive actions rather than anything that would be otherwise more complex problem-solving-esque kind of capacities, and that would like lead us to think that they were aware of their environment. And then I would say that in terms of neurological complexity, there's no reason to give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of having enough complexity to necessarily experience, like have that awareness, yet not be taking action. And they're the kind of like two simultaneous understandings of consciousness that I think we'll have, that we know that it's tied to certain behaviors and that it's also usually linked to certain material causes. And that's why I say like it's kind of hylomorphic in terms of the way in which I would approach it. So yeah, that's kind of why I would delineate the line between plants and animals with a central nervous system. I think that the kind of the weird like kind of bridge is those animals that do not have brains and stuff. They're kind of like tentative, and I would just go on moral hazard, and also the production of the extraction of those animals is a detriment to like other sentient beings anyway. So yeah, I hope that answers that.
Well, I'm going to reply a bit. How you doing? Good debate, everyone. So you said the first response was plants only do reflexive behaviors. So you could argue that a lot of insects behave purely reflexively as well. Like you stimulate them in some way and they have very predictable behaviors based on this. And also there's a lot of, like trees, for example, are arguably much more complicated in terms of when you consider all of the life involved in them and the potential neural connections and just the connections and behaviors with other trees, their reproductive systems, etc. That they could be argued as potentially more complex than a lac bug, for example. And yeah, sponges are a good example, right? Because you brought it up yourself. Sponges, I think they don't have a nervous system, and they don't even have any like sensory organs. Whereas,
but they're animals, not plants.
Yeah, but some plants do have sensory organs, right? They do have much more complex sensory inputs than sponges. I think sponges just contract when they feel touch, right? Whereas some plants both do that as well as respond to other stimuli such as pheromones, light, etc. And yeah.
Like I would say that it's interesting. I'd say that like ultimately, like I'd say that we don't really have a reason to believe that sponges are conscious. I think that just making the bridge like just because it's an animal seems to be a bit irrational. I'd say that things like neurological complexity, not just complexity as well. It's not just like neurological complexity; it's like complexity as a whole. So it's not just like the capacity to respond to pheromones and other stimuli. It's like the capacity to like have a certain level of what we usually relate to like certain like brain states, quote unquote. But I would say that like we could like if it was a plant that was complex enough, we could give it the benefit of the doubt, and I don't see an issue with that. I just think that most plants usually aren't complex enough. I don't think that we should just draw the line between complex and like plants and not plants, but yeah, like I think that in terms of most of the like for example crops and stuff, I don't think that's really an issue.
Thank you. I guess my only response would be trees, I guess.
Yeah, I mean trees are like I don't know, like I don't think that I've not seen enough information to say that trees would likely be conscious. I've not seen that they've got like a complex enough neurological system to maybe like relate that to them. And then it seems that when they are purely in the sense that they're purely responsive, that they're only reacting to certain stimuli and they're not like problem solving or anything like that. But I don't know. I don't know enough on it, to be honest, Tomato, to give you like a definitive answer in that respect. I could do more research.
Yes.
But yeah, Lewis, I was just thinking, one of the reasons for the debate was to question the dogmatism of what people are saying as veganism today. And I think we got into this, but we didn't really highlight it that much. We didn't really talk about it that much. Like we touched upon it with manure. Like just because something's an animal product, it doesn't mean it's not vegan, right? You agree with that, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can have symbiotic relationships with animals. It's about the exploitation of animals. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Talk
Yeah,
about
we
this
agree.
briefly with.
We
I
agree
think
100%.
I think me and Tomato actually talked about this as well, didn't we? Because he was talking about like how animals and humans can work really well together in terms of like manure production, especially. And it's like, like I don't see like an issue with that. Like as long as you're nothing's being harmed, and it's a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship. Yeah, whatever, man, that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's vital. Like personally, I don't see a world where we don't have that. I think that excluding animals from all of our relationships is just doesn't sustain. It's impossible. Like we're depleting land and stuff. There's no way you can just perpetually keep on using up and burning away all the land.
Well, did Marty want to jump in? He said a minute ago.
But just quickly beforehand, does anyone in my chat want to ask a question to any of the to me, to Foot Soldier, to anyone? I can't guarantee they'll be in the chat. So if you've got a question for like I don't know Boris Johnson, it mightn't get answered, but you can ask it anyway. I'm not going to stop you. So yeah, but yeah, I think it was an interesting debate though, and I think that there is a point in pulling up the dogmatism. You gotta kind of stay like, you gotta kind of like stay, firm and what's the word I'm looking for? You gotta stay shit, I can't remember the word I was looking for. I know what it means, but it doesn't matter. It's like
vigilant.
Vigilant. That's the. Thank you. Fucking hell. Yeah, you got to stay vigilant. This one in the chat even just came out and said vigilant. Yeah, you got to stay vigilant against dogmatism because it just burrows its way into every ideology.
Yeah, because I think we're not just vegan because it's cool. We're vegan because there's a reason for it. Right?
Yeah, there's like a moral imperative.
Right, and but if it's because it's a moral imperative, but there's no reason for something to be excluded from your lifestyle because there's no actual real moral significance of it, then it doesn't make sense to give that thing up or to abstain from that. But so I guess you've argued in the debate that you think, I don't know, like outside of a debate context and just sort of like in your personal opinion, like now it's post-debate, like do you really think that it's actually like genuinely morally that significant, like the shellac, like because I just see this tiny immobilized blob covered in goo.
I don't know why the size and the ability to be mobile is what defines like the moral significance of the being though. Like it does not come into my calculations at all. I don't see it as relevant. Does it feel good or bad depending on what's going on? That's really what matters. It's like like the thing is you could almost modify Jeremy Bentham's it's not can they reason nor can they talk. It's not can they reason nor can they walk. But can they suffer?
Yeah, but that's where that was like the whole argument that I had in the debate was that I am extremely skeptical that they're able to suffer, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like you were saying you're skeptical, but then no offense, but the foundation of that was like a really like speculative biological take. Do you know what I mean? And like, if you provided the evidence for that, then fair enough. You're like, look, the female lackbug is just not conscious. He has the evidence. I'd be like, all right, fair enough. Fucking Shellac's vegan, But like, nah, I just don't see any evidence for that. And so it's just moral hazard.
Yeah, because I don't think there's a huge, what's the word? A huge rush to go out there in the scientific community to study the consciousness of lackbugs, right? It's just not. It's not something that's really been studied that much, right?
Somebody said, what about algae or clams? I don't think there's any reason to believe that algae are conscious, and clams is like that kind of grey area where we should just, I think, act on moral hazard just for the fact that like the production of like clams and stuff would normally cause like definite sentient beings death. Can foot
Clams are
soldier?
definitely sentient, you say?
No, like they're saying that would cause suffering to definite sentient beings. Usually in the production of like like seafood products with clams in. Somebody says, can foot soldier hold the position that it is justified to use shellac whilst being against eating oysters though, or carmine used for candy and dyeing his kitchen rug, for example?
I would say that carmine, that's like ground up little. It's not like a ladybug, but it looks sort of like a ladybug, I think. No, they're cool. They sort of like fly about and do stuff, and just like getting them and crushing them is a bit out of order. So I'd say that's just completely unnecessary.
Okay. Nuckin Frutz says, you want to know how I believe in ethics when I reject Kantian deontology? I'm a Hegelian. You can check out my video, Objective Ethics Explained. Like, what is it? Objective morality exists even if there is no God. So yeah. Is utility a good foundation for morality? No. The moral good is nested in the aesthetic good. That is wrong. So yeah, I think that's all of the questions, really.
Real quick, I'll unmute Marty in a second, but I have a feeling since you said he's really into philosophy, it might turn into like a big discussion. So maybe we could just put Walt's question on the table first, real quick. I don't know if you see it in the debate chat.
Yeah. Why are we giving some insects a pass? Driving, we could charge transportation like radically different lives, but not shellac producing insects. Yeah, no, I don't think that it matters what insect we're talking about. I think that in terms of like the ability to cause suffering and death to insects is what matters. Can we avoid like the suffering and death? What impact would it have on us? Like, would it be causing more suffering and death if we were to avoid driving? I think that driving is in our society usually necessary. We can't really kind of get past it. Most people who drive do so not because it's like a luxury. They do so because they need to get to a job or something like that, or like look after a family member, things like that. So like I think that driving, like unnecessary driving, I think could be kind of pushed out for it. But like even then, you could say like what they should be doing is taking public transport. But like there has to be some level of moral hazard that we're okay with, I think. And there's also the intention. It's like a bug may die if you drive a car. It's like it must not necessarily die to drive the car, and I think that is an important moral distinction.
Yeah, that's an important distinction that I was talking to Verbal about actually, and he didn't seem to buy it, but I seem to agree with that. I guess it's just in the case of shellac, it's more sort of the consciousness thing than like if it was like if there were cows that produced shellac, it would obviously be a no-go. But it's just
I think that I don't know. I wouldn't make the line just based on that, but whatever, man. I don't think that we can just. I think it's got to be based on like what evidence we have, and I think that there's not enough evidence to say that like these insects aren't sentient. I don't know. So
yeah, well, I haven't found any information on the consciousness of black bugs at all.
Yeah, it's a bit like, I'm not gonna lie, the neuroscience is shit for consciousness anyway. I'm sure Marty will probably be able to spice it up with some pretty good takes on consciousness. I think Marty knows a bit more about consciousness than I do, to be entirely honest with you. So you wanna just unmute Marty, give him a crack of the whip, you know?
Sounds like a plan. You're good to go, Marty.
Sorry, I wasn't here for the entire debate, and maybe this is going to be a disappointing answer, but I'm not sure if I can provide these detailed, nuanced points that you were looking for about exactly where to create a detailed account of.
I was gonna say, if you can't tell me whether or not a female black bug is conscious, I don't even know why we're here anymore.
Yeah. I was just going to sort of do some clarifications on hylomorphism and sort of push back on this idea that, well, one of the sort of maxioms that you had originally sort of subscribed to, that until we can prove otherwise that a thing is conscious, we should just assume that it's conscious. Seems like sort of a precarious.
I wouldn't go that
presupposition.
far. I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't say that, like, unless we can prove otherwise, we should assume it's conscious. I'd say that if we have reason to believe that it is conscious and no reason to believe that, for whatever reason, it isn't conscious. So let's say it exerts, like, some of the characteristics that we would normally associate with consciousness, like complex central nervous systems and complex behaviors, then we should just assume that it's conscious, like for moral hazard's sake, even.
But you yourself have basically said that there are no strict identity claims, or I guess I'm not really sure. It seems like hylomorphism of some sort would tailor you towards some identity claims, but it also seems like you're wanting to say that there are no identity claims between certain types of neurobiological procedures and consciousness itself.
Well, I think that, like, so I see
And
your
we
point.
don't
Sorry.
even, and every time we use words like consciousness or sentience, I'm not really, I mean, like, are we just going to, and it's okay to say yes to this, by the way, but are you going to say that it's a primitive, or are you just going to, or do you actually have ways of talking about sort of a minimal notion of consciousness?
I'd say that when we talk about minimum, like, really, when we're like, I think that we've got enough evidence to say that there is some sort of connection between material and consciousness. I think, like, usually is associated with behaviors, and I think that the foundation for most of this is actually a form of behaviorism, and or behavioral analysis rather. So, like, we normally associate consciousness with really, like, the enactment of a will. And that's really the foundation epistemically from which we've built upon, and then associated that with material, causes. I think that we've got enough reason to give doubt that if it wasn't exerting a certain level of behavior, that would normally be, it would be more of a doubt more than anything, because it's more of the fact that we don't know where consciousness kind of originates, and we know that we know that complex forms of behavior usually coincide with, certain material complexities like brains and neurological systems, that we have enough reason to give the benefit of the doubt of something that has, a complex neurological system, but isn't exerting those behaviors. So it would be a hazard, it'd be moral hazard. There'd be, like, I don't think we could conclusively go, that's consciousness, that's conscious, or we have, like, a solid reason to believe that's conscious. It would be more like, we have reason to believe it could be conscious, and let's just act as if it were, in order to prevent, like, moral tragedy and travesty.
Yeah, I guess that's the sort of pushback that you're going to be getting, though, is that if there isn't an identity claim between some sort of neural correlates and consciousness, and that we seem to be exhibiting certain types of behaviors that are suggestive within plant-based organisms, that also seem to promote the idea, at least in some sort of intuitive primitive sense, that they have a will or an intention or a normativity.
I would be forced to accept it, and I would be fine with that.
Yeah, but what possible evidence would you have other than, buying into the claim, I think, at the end of the day, that behaviors or intentions are directly transparent?
I
doesn't seem like there is any, right?
I don't think there is a way to get around it, to be entirely honest with you. I just think that the best indicators we have are behaviors, and then I think there's an aspect of hazard in relation to material, which we kind of associate behavior with. And I think that's just the way that kind of things have worked out.
Yeah, you could see why that would be sort of unsatisfying to a majority of people who are trying to find the...
Yeah, I think it's unsatisfying, mostly in regards...
See what
Sorry.
But you see, like, I think we can sedate, like, we could do things to sedate plants, especially within, like, I don't know, Bermuda fly traps or whatever they're called. I forgot what they're called, the little fly traps, or certain types of plant-based organisms within, like, the sea. And you could sedate these types of plants, and then you see that their behaviors change. And so I think that this shows us even a smaller minimal threshold for there being something akin to an intentional act and a behavioral act. But I don't know if that's consciousness as we talk about it within animals or insects. But then when we're talking about consciousness in this sort, we're no longer addressing behaviors. We're addressing some sort of primitive notion that we're unable to define. Because if we do go ahead and define those types of things, like within propositional sentences or with beliefs that can think of a certain type of a certain time span forward, right? That's obviously not what we want to get at when we want to preserve the integrity of or the rights of certain types of animals. So I just, I don't really have a solution.
I don't think that, to be fair, Marty, I don't think there is a. So I think like when we get to the finer points of consciousness, like philosophy, neuroscience, all of it starts to break the fuck down. And I think that's like it's just like we don't have any solutions as of yet. Anyway, I think that like what we can say, like I would just say like in terms of moral hazard, I have more reason to believe. I think I would say at least partly in terms of behaviors and whether they are correlated to consciousness or not in terms of that primitive, as you say, is maybe tentative, but it's the best thing that we'll have. And so something that's exhibited in behaviors, I would say, attribute the likelihood of consciousness to it, whilst something that is not exhibiting those behaviors and doesn't have any other like correlative factors in relation to what we, as demonstrably, what we would see as demonstrations of consciousness, then I think that's just all we have, really. And so, like, if we talk about plants, maybe they are conscious. But then I think the best pushback for the vegan is literally just to go, less plants die. Anyway, we can see. So,
but I mean, like, it doesn't have to be squarely. It doesn't have to be squarely like it just is conscious, right? I could point to certain types of behaviors like the ones that I had before where we sedate certain types of plants and then we can see functional differences. I can point to the normativity of certain types of plant life. And then I could sort of begin pushing back on well, look, if we're going at the notion that everything has at least this sort of normativity, intentionality, something's got to give. Either we die or it dies. And then there's no satisfying reply that I've ever heard from a vegan there.
Yeah, I don't think
what we then have to do is what you don't want to occur, and that is create a hierarchy of consciousness because you think it's sort of bullshit to have a hierarchy of consciousness. But I mean, as a Hegelian, right? We shouldn't be opposed to a hierarchy of consciousness because there is a certain type of dialectical process of where we can see that purely non-reflective species aren't the same thing as reflective species, and that requires a certain dialectical process to get to self-consciousness.
But then why would we say that would be a separation in so it wouldn't be like a hierarchization in consciousness or subjectivity?
It wouldn't be, but it wouldn't. But then we'd have to create a criterion outside of sentience and consciousness that we appeal to within ethics.
I don't think we need to. I think that like so for example, in terms of the plant, I think that like so for example, if it's either we die or the plant dies, I think that's just like, it's just minimize suffering in any way we can. Like, I know what implies can in that respect. And the function of your being is, necessarily going to entail some level of suffering towards another, if you were to consider plants as aspects of the other. And that's just the way it is. It's sad, but it's reality.
Yeah. I guess what I would push back on immediately there is it's not, I mean, maybe there is a sort of aspect of where suffering is something that we need to look at, but it's also, as we had a conversation before, given that I'm a Kantian of some variety, it's that they're not able to pursue their own ends through their own means, and that we're deliberately ceasing those ends with our own ends. And if we're not respecting that organism's ends, right, that is a sort of unconditional norm of which we have to be able to step back from. But at the same time, we can't step back from that and also continue our lives because there is probably no organism, right? No organism that you could possibly talk of that doesn't have ends.
I mean,
as you said, a blade of grass can't even be predetermined. Oh no, this was actually Siegel who told me even a blade of grass can't be predicted in advance. It seems to have its own normativity that we just can't figure out.
Well, this is the thing. Like, what I would say is like, in terms of ends, I would say that. Like one, Kant said that the end of all rational happiness is the end of all rational beings, which I would agree with.
Arthuria Debate Archive donated £7.22. Thanks for the debate, PP. Much love from Arthuria.
Oh, thank you, Arthuria. I appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
No worries.
And just to just to kind of like clarify, I'd say that like happiness, like I think happiness is only really expressible in terms of the experience of the being, rather than like the simple function of the being. Like in terms of like observable function, I think it's actually the perceived appreciation of the being rather than simply the function of the creature. Like, so for example, I have reason to believe that a male praying mantis is not too happy with the end of its function. Like, but it may be very happy just before the end of its function. And if there was a way to protect male praying mantis so that its function was not brought to an end in terms of its death, but it had it experienced a positivity, I would say that when we talk about quote unquote functions, I'd say that they're reducible to conscious appreciative states, really, and not necessarily to naturally occurring phenomena in the sense of like the actual like material development of a being.
Yeah, so if I may recapitulate some of what you just said, so for my own clarification,
Absolutely.
I'm just trying to see if I understood you correctly. So what you're saying is that you want to create some sort of a disjunction between the intent of the animal and its general functional normativity. So generally we see certain types of normative functions exhibited within, say, a mantis, right? A praying mantis or whatever they're called. And one of it might be that it eventually gets into some sort of reproductive urge. It has some sort of reproductive urge where it gets eaten alive. And that might not actually afford with be in accordance with its intentions. So we can create a disjunction between the types of ethics that we need to pursue and the normative functions of what this thing is trying to pursue.
Exactly. And in the words of Hegel, man is by nature not what he should be.
Yeah, I have no problem with that as long as we see that generally, and I think maybe a majority of the cases, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on the sort of species that we're talking about, is that when we're looking at the normative function of a species, what it ought to be doing in certain types of cases, that seems to be in accordance with what it wants to be doing in most cases. So for example,
most times, yeah.
Yeah, so for example, the bobcat typically rears its young, typically is within certain types of climates that aren't extremely cold, like Antarctica or Greenland or whatever, and that putting it there in accordance with its typical normative function is completely ethical. Unethical. We put it in these extreme climates. But nonetheless, I don't think that there's any sort of normative content or intentional content of any certain type of organism, including a tree, that would mean demolishing it or getting rid of it, right? So we see, I think, trees often in sort of competition with other trees, and sometimes in cooperation with other trees. That is to gain certain types of nutrients, grow. You can kind of see that it wants to do that in one way or another.
Even communicate with that, like about like predators or something as well, or even like release certain chemicals and stuff like that. It's like weird, like how complex like tree communication actually is. I remember seeing something about that, like about pheromone release and stuff.
Yeah, and it seems to be even suggestive, depending on how aesthetic your realism is, or how much of an aesthetic realist you're subscribing. Certain types of flowers actually make themselves more beautiful, so they attract bees. And so you can see certain types of selective pressures because of bees, external selective pressures, that they change their colors or they change their sort of form. And I see this, of course I have to argue it, but I think I can argue it. We see a sort of normativity, and I think we both agree, almost all the way down. And if not all the way down, we can make it we can at least make it within the any sort of living organism. And I think that this poses a sort of real threat against, one that we don't take seriously right now, but maybe we will in the future, sort of serious threat of where we either disband this notion of having whatever intuitive notion of sentience that we have that we only attribute towards bugs right now, or we accept that, but we create some sort of hierarchy of conscious steps of which we say, like, look, given that these are the cases, it doesn't seem that they're conscious enough or developed enough to where we can eat them, to where we're not just making sort of ad hoc justifications. So I'm just saying one of those seems to have to go, and I don't see a solution. I don't see a third solution there unless you do.
I guess like the thing is that we can have an ever growing like understanding of it, um, in terms of like conscious appreciation, um, and I think that it's I'd just say like for ethics that's kind of what we're forced into. It's like whether we can attribute consciousness to these other creatures. I don't think we need to hierarchize it. I don't think that we're ever there's no like necessity to hierarchize in that respect. But then we could always say that look, the likelihood of it actually occurring is like more or less likely in this creature. And then obviously have a sliding scale
so
of like risk in terms of like how much risk would be, what's the likelihood of like trespassing upon the subjectivity of like a daisy versus a like human.
I don't see how you don't view that as a hierarchy of sorts. And what I have in mind here is a dialectical hierarchy of where there's certain types of prerequisite steps in order to get to the next step. So, for example, I don't think you can reach self-consciousness without some sort of notion of consciousness.
I would
don't
agree.
think you
I would
can.
agree. I would agree. And I think that like
Right.
we could say that like if you say like it's a hierarchy in terms of literally like likelihood, that would be fair enough. But then it's not to say that it's a hierarchy in terms of the experience of those creatures mattering more, because most of the people that actually engage in this quote unquote sentience hierarchy try to say that there is less value to the life of, let's say, an ant or an insect than that of a cow or a dog because of its neurological complexity. When in reality, there's no reason to think that. If we talk about the experience of the being less complex but still value laden, there's no reason to think that the value experience of that creature is not as considerable. And I would even say that as long as it's having a value experience, it is by definition as considerable as a more complex value experience. Like the amount of stimuli or the amount of the complexity of the experience doesn't determine its overall worth. And I think that's the separation between Tom Regan and his understanding of the cup is what matters and not its contents, versus the kind of singer. It's about the experience of that creature and its pain and pleasure.
Well, let me push back on that and offer some examples of where I think that would be possibly wrong. I don't know. Maybe you have something to say in relation to this. So I think that things that don't have certain types of capacities, such as like the ability of being able to judge a painting, there's no means of which they're suffering if we remove a painting from their view, if they can't contemplate on the beauty of the painting. And so removing that painting wouldn't be in any sort of way detrimental to that organism.
Mm-hmm.
So you would agree with something like that being a type of hierarchical standard to where if we can appreciate or even contemplate certain types of things, then those values only seem to have an immediate importance to us. It wouldn't depreciate. So we wouldn't be, and we shouldn't afford certain types of organisms these types of luxuries.
Well, yeah, I would say that, but that's not like less consideration of that being. That's equal consideration of that being, but its psychological complexity determines that it like that stimuli is of no relevance to it. So it's like you are equally considering them. It just so happens that that is of no consequence or no consideration to them. So it's like they matter just as much, but they don't give a fuck about pains.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to, I guess what I'm trying to find out is if they can't contemplate. So what type of hierarchy, or I guess,
What am I pushing
How should
back
I
on
put
in
this?
terms of hierarchy?
Yeah, I mean, what do we mean, I guess, by treating all these things equal, other than looking at these sorts of things of which we're going to deprive them of certain types of relations that they can't even have an appreciation for?
When we talk about treating them equal, I'll be in relation to their interests. So like the value of their experiences is as equal to the value of any other experience. So if their experience is positive in terms of like, creating an experience of, well-being for those animals, then that's as positive as a human who is also having a more complex, but like in terms of psychological complexity, but no less no more valuable experience in relation to reality. So it's like we just consider them and their interests and then their functions equally.
Okay. Would you also say that one of the sorts of things that we have to keep in general, that we have to keep a sort of eye on in ethics is not that we're just going to be respecting their ends, but, you know, that their ends also harmonize with our own ends?
I think so. I think that's going to have to be the reality of the situation, that, like, obviously, like, you know, the kingdom of ends in, like, the Kantian sense. I think that the reality is that we should try and maximize the you know, the greatest outcome. You know, like, not go utilitarian, because it's not really, but it's like try to maximize the expression of subjectivity for all sentient beings. And I think Kant made that point without having to be utilitarian about it. And that if we have conflictions in subjectivity, then we are going to have to alleviate those conflictions somehow. And I think that the reality of the situation, it's like,
What about this then? It doesn't seem possible to unconditionally respect every single form of sentience within this world, if we include all forms of organisms, because the harmony that's possible in order for the survival of the entire world's organism, if you want to consider it as one giant organism, is that there is some sort of predatorial prey relationship of where a bug has to eat a plant and a certain type of animal has to eat a certain type of bug, and so on and so forth, and that without these sorts of pursuits in one way or another, this harmony is impossible. And so there would have to be some sort of sacrifices in the end in order to have this harmony.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. I think that, like, the only person that I think give an overall, like, explanation of how we could maybe resolve that was David Pierce, Transhumanist Society, Genetically Modify Nature. like, we're just going to change the functions so that they do harmonize, or remove those functions that, like, obviously don't, whilst creating, like, an ecological balance that's sustainable. It's very tentative. I know it's very speculative. And obviously there's that aspect of playing God, and we could always, like, fuck things up worse. But I think that, you know, not allowing things... He made a really convincing argument, I think, of, look, the dice is being rolled either way. It's either going to land, like, if we do nothing, things continue the way they are, and it's harmful. And if we intervene, yeah, we could make things worse, but we could also make things better. And it's whether that risk-reward ratio is justified. And I think that's, like, a solid point. Like, at the end of the day... if we can make things better in terms of the functions of creatures being more, like not like essentially creating beings that aren't going to be born to suffer, or, you know, creating a horrible, like, removing the horrible experiences that are, you know, felt by, like, you know, all those animals which are, you know, currently being ripped apart and so on, like, in nature. Like, yeah, like 100% we should probably do that, and we're going to have to intervene at some point if we're ethical, I think. I'd say we just have to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess there's several risks associated with that. Is that generally when we do try to genetically engineer things, one, we generally tend to think of subjects as objects or as commodities, and then you can get into gene ethics and things like that. And then secondly, this isn't going to really be implemented in any sort of way where we can actually modify, the entire world and planet in order to, lend ourselves this sort of lead.
You could do a canny bit though with gene drives. You can do, like, and it's not like, obviously if we can't reach perfection, then, like, fair enough. But we can, like, you know, it's like, almost Marxist in this. We could go Marxist. Like, what is it? From each according to their ability to each according to their need. You know, we'll pick out the lives of the worst off animals first, and then we'll work our way.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm a little bit also skeptical of that, because if we were to even remove a certain type of species, this is kind of maybe not a good example, because we were thinking of, like when we first developed, like, say, forestry, and I think it was actually, was it in Scotland or Ireland? I can't remember. It's probably close to where you were, where you live, where we developed forestry. It was kind of a means to an end, for us to get wood. And so we began replacing certain types of forests that we've cut down with wood. And of course, this was great. The soil that was there before managed to grow these trees. We got these trees. We were, trying to constantly replace them. But what happens is that there's always some sort of underdetermination of nature finding its own way, and we just don't know what exactly that way is. So what do I have in mind is that we remove the biodiversity when we created these forests. We didn't have the fungi. We didn't have the certain types of plants that were there along with the wood that we were replacing. And so what happens is that the species that were surrounding that area, the bugs, the animal, the plant life, all sort of collapsed, and we reach some level of extinction in certain types of animals. And so what happens when you do gene editing of the sort that you might be talking about is that you have to come into contact with a variety of different types of elements.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm happy to say that there is a risk there, but I don't think extinction's even necessarily
strong risk, though, very strong risk.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Because we don't know anything about how. Well, sorry, I won't say we don't know anything, but there's always a sense of where we don't understand what life does.
Life finds a way, man. It was in Jurassic Park,
yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I was saying. Life finds a way, but it's also continuously underdetermined of what it does in relation to whatever context it's surrounding. That's the only way that we understand life, I think, is normatively and towards its surrounding context of where the inner is decided by the outer.
I would agree.
And
I think that the issue is that like non-intervention, it seems to be like a non-option unless we're willing to say that this is always going to be better than our intervention. And I think that at the end of the day, like even extinction might be preferable than the lives of some creatures if they were in a constant state of frustration. So like you could even say that like if a life was just not worth living, it would be a form of like euthanasia, or even like preventing them from being born would be, once again, it would be just like it wouldn't be a negative for that animal anyway, and so like you kind of end up in negative ethics in like in an anti-natalist sense. It's like, would it be, should we be anti-natalist about like like rabbits or something? I don't know. Like it's like these are the questions that we're probably going to need to ask, and I think we can't like kind of want. I think right now the only reason that we haven't asked them to the point in which we're like even like starting to really kind of deal with them in terms of not only our technology, but in terms of our responsibilities, because we've lived under such an anthropocentric system for so long that we haven't even considered, like, look, like, are we going to have to intervene here at some point? And at what point would we be justified at intervening? Like,
Yeah, sometimes I wonder about what it would exactly mean to put an animal species in extinction because it's a sort of preferable alternative to the form of suffering that they've undergone, because I can imagine there being a sort of future society of where we're in tremendous agony and pain, but I don't think, and I think we actually are now in a lot of ways, but I don't think, I would push towards anti-natalism or pro-mortalism.
Certainly not pro-mortalism,
something...
but I think that like the anti-natalists that I've spoken to, like you should probably speak to some of them. Are interesting, like really interesting people, and make some pretty convincing arguments. I wouldn't say that they're right. Like I don't think they're right. I think you probably caught maybe a couple of me debates with them. I
guess I don't understand how. Maybe there's a simple reply to this. I haven't looked into it, but I don't see how. And this is kind of a tangent, of course. I don't see how. If you support the idea of let's not reproduce, you're generally doing it for the same reasons that you're basically supporting mortalist arguments. I don't see the asymmetry there, I guess, that people claim to have.
I think that pro-mortalism requires the individual to take action to actively, quote-unquote, frustrate their function, whilst the anti-natalist would be the prevention of function occurring in the first place, and so wouldn't require the premature ending of a life narrative, but rather the non-creation of one. And so one has no value at all in the sense as it has no like ability to be evaluated, whilst the other, if ended prematurely, could have a negative value. They may have went on to live a better overall life. Depends on the argument. Depends on the argument the anti-natalist is making. So, like, if the anti-natalist is arguing from the argument from consent, for example, it's quite a deontological point where you like, look, being born was not consensual, so putting someone into that scenario is breaching their subjectivity. And then I don't think that's a good argument, but it's one that's made, and it's something that obviously once they are alive, then the individual's consent no longer, like, it's not a consideration from the anti-natalist. It's not like, all right, now you should kill them. It's more like, right, well, maybe you should have considered this. They should have considered doing this to them, but now they're alive. Are you happy to be here? You know, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And they might very well go like, oh yeah, I would have consented, but that's not like kind of the issue for them. And then there's like other ones. There's like quite a few arguments for antinatalism. There's the argument from consent. There's the argument like in terms of like life as suffering, which is like kind of like maybe the one that would align with pro-mortalism a little bit more. But then not necessarily, because you could go like all Buddhist kind of like stoic with it. And then I'm trying to think of the other ones. There's population arguments, which are more contextual than anything else. There's the argument of like produce a need, whether you are moral to produce need. That's another one. I'm trying to think of these. There's quite a few arguments. Like I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Yeah, sure.
But
I mean, we don't have to get into that. I understand that I think I have a reply to a few of those, but that would kind of be a little bit of a discursive
should
tale.
talk to like Seven of Swords. He was like a really, really like continental-esque anti-natalist. I think you probably enjoy talking to. And then I think Conundrum. I've never really watched much of his stuff, but I think he's also another one who gets recommended a lot. I know Steve Godfrey recommends him.
Yeah.
Steve was a cool guy as well. Check him out. And then Vegan Anti-Natalist was really cool. Spoke to him about Julio Cabrera, but I think he's just like sort of disappeared. And then Question Mark, who runs the Anti-Natalist podcast. It's got some stuff. Oh, and there's also the asymmetry argument by David Benatar. I forgot to mention that one. It's like the big boy. I think that it's wrong. I think Julio Cabrera, another anti-natalist, argues why it's wrong, which is funnily enough. But that's like there's an asymmetry between our responsibility to the production of suffering and the production of well-being in terms of producing another being. So if we produce so we would be responsible for like all the suffering they receive, but none of the well-being. I don't know how he manages to pull that logical like rabbit out of a hat, but you know Julio Cabrera like kind of takes that apart.
Yeah, I mean maybe a somewhat bad argument is that I don't think that things that don't exist have any sort of rights in any sort of sense, or I guess I just don't see.
I would agree.
I just don't see. I don't see how that comes into fruition.
It's about the consideration of a being. I think we could talk about the possibility of existence, and so like a possible being having value in terms of our ethical discourse. So it's like if, for example, if we were to, birth slaves, like human slaves, we could say that would be wrong because of the being that which would be created from that birth. And so we're talking about the experience of
Yeah, I understand, but that's not coming into existence. That's not what's unjustified. It's the sort of.
It's the treatment once they are, yeah, like, and it's the means to an end relationship.
Right.
Which I agree with, and that's the argument I make. So, we
agree on too much perspective.
Yeah, that's the thing. We probably agree. Like, well, if like obviously you're like kind of like on the same sort of deontological kind of Kantian Hegel kind of train, at least the same, maybe different train, maybe the same track. I don't know. Sorry.
No, but I do want a response to the. To that, I think, especially if we're on the same boat about normativity being infused in nature, intentionality, or prototypical form of intentionality being within organisms. Like how do we solve that problem if we want to be both vegans and respect nature itself as a sort of agent? I mean, I don't see how to do it other than start by creating a hierarchical standard, than just giving.
I would say that, like, sorry, continue.
No, other than just creating a hierarchical standard, or just giving up, right? Just giving up and just saying this is the best we've got, or something like that. But then that's not satisfying. That's not an actual answer. That's just giving up.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like, we warrant more investigation is another thing that like, it's like, this is the best we've got for now. But I think that ultimately like intentional states, for example, I think are a good indication of a will. And I think that also, when we talk about like obviously conscious awareness, like and like where we're the foundations of the will, I think that usually it's like obviously the reason that we think that something has value, a value laden experience, is actually this behavioral engagement in reality in the first place, which is kind of what Levinas points out in the Ethics of the Face. It's like you're seeing someone like basically resist something that's going on, and then you attribute that resistance to, a rejection of your judgment. Which is like, if you go to kill someone and they resist, then you realize that, wait a minute, my understanding of value is being resisted, it's being pulled into question, which is where like the kind of the ethics of the face kind of fall from in the first place, which is kind of where I would say we're kind of forced into with animals. And I think
but that happens in all sorts of organisms. You cut them down, they cut back. You injure a tree in some sort of way, it tries to recuperate.
I agree. I think that
it resists. I mean, nature, all of organism resists.
But I think
as we pollute the earth, it sort of tries to resist us.
True. And I think we can see that there is usually a difference in reflexive responses and like autonomous reflexive responses, autonomous responsive and reflexive responses, and we seem to tie that into the brain in terms of like you can be unaware even in your own body of a reflexive response, but you can't be unaware of a conscious response that is your awareness. And I think that we usually relate that to material complexity. And I think that it's like, don't get me wrong, I do think that we can't just boil. I don't think we can be reductionists to the brain. Like, I think we both agree on that. But I think that there is. This is why I said hylomorphic, because I think there is somewhat a relationship between complex matter, like material formations in terms of biology, and consciousness that I think is like pretty established in some respects. Like, we know that, like,
but you can't say that. Yeah, you can't say that perspective, especially if you're basically saying like, look, I mean, we don't know what it means to say that consciousness arises, and yet at the same time, nerve structures, brains, and associating and correlating these sorts of things.
I'm not saying that we'll have a direct. I don't think we'll have an understanding of it. I don't think that we can say that we But
look, I already said like behaviors directly. You could directly perceive intentional states and behaviors. Otherwise, and there's an actual formal argument for this. Otherwise. Otherwise you always underdetermine what other people are thinking and what they mean.
Well, I think that you can, like, I don't see an issue with that, but I also think that there's a level of like the benefit of the doubt that we could give to someone that's unconscious, for example, having like a level of experience in terms of like dream states, for example, but that we're not aware of their will and the experience of the phenomena from which they're engaging, for example. So we're not aware of even the intentative states from which is occurring in their, in their like being asleep.
But I think that's an argument against you, because we'd still, despite of them being unaware and being in a dream state, we recognize that they still have a will, and we recognize it through immediately, directly perceivable behavioral, behavioral demonstrations. So yeah.
Like, what do you mean? Like, how we do that? Like, obviously, like, when we see something sleeping, what would you say, like, is the behavioral demonstration there? Like, or a coma or something?
Well, if we're talking about sleep, we generally know that people get out of a sleep, and then we generally know that their bodies are acting in a certain type of way as well. Like, so two things. We know they're going to get out of sleep, since we're talking about sleep instead of a coma. So therefore, we could then directly infer from that they're going to have a will later on. And then secondly, if we're talking about a coma, and we're talking about like a coma that lasts forever, is that what you mean?
Well, I think like even like I don't think we need to differentiate. Like, I'm gonna have to go in 2 minutes, by the way. But like, I think that like I'm worried I'm just gonna miss the shop. That's all. I think that the reality is that we can infer from the coma that like other comas would be similar to, like, there would be a self-association with the coma victim. So like a coma victim versus another coma victim, we could assume that those comas are alike in that respect, and and so we could say that there is a likelihood of experience there. I think that in terms of like sleep, it's the same sort of thing, and then I think with like animals in like terms of neurological complexity, I think the reason that I associate neurological complexity really with animals is because, like, consciousness rather, is because it seems that we can't point out that there is an identity relation between particular neurons and lobes of the brain and certain activities and experiences. But it seems that we can relate the function of the brain not only to survival but to awareness. Where if someone is brain dead, or if they, if someone is brain dead, they seem to lose awareness of reality. I think like if they can have the brain stem still, I think if they still have the brain stem but not the brain, like they become like, I remember seeing like something on this.
It's even stronger than that, actually. You don't need the brainstem, you don't need the cerebellum, you don't need any aspect of the brain in order to be conscious, but you need at least one aspect, at least one of those things, in order for a human being to be conscious. But yeah, we have studies of brain stems, we have studies of just the cerebellum. It's ridiculous, right? But then that's why I'm sort of pushing back, is that these neural correlates don't need to have that.
But this is the thing. I think that the only thing that we can say is like we seem to think that it seems to be the case that so long as there is a certain like aspect of neurological density, like a certain like aspect of material which holds a certain amount of properties, consciousness can exist there. That's why I normally make it like hylomorphic. It's like,
yeah, but all we need in order to defend hylomorphism, thank God, thank God for this, is that we just need a body, right? But anything, it's just like anything has a body.
We don't seem to think that, like, at least it usually we can't say that someone would be conscious or acts consciously if there is no brain at all. You know what I mean? And that we don't have anything that.
It happens within starfish and jellyfish. Unless you want to say, well, okay, they don't have a brain like ours, but they have a central nervous system. Okay, well, but then you're just changing the definitions, and like you're talking about something else, and then I could start talking about, well, okay, we don't need those things for like plants and trees and things like that.
But
right?
I think octopi is a really good one, because I think that like most people would agree that they have the intentional states that we would normally associate with consciousness, and they don't have brains at all, but they have very complex ganglia or whatever, like incredibly dense neurological structures, which seem to indicate that. And I think like it's kind of like, at what point do we say it's complex enough is kind of like really the kind of the crux for my argument. And honestly, I do not know. I think that's just where I have to go, look, I'm not sure, man, but I think that we should at least give the benefit of the doubt to this level of complexity. In reality, all of it spans from behavior and intentional states, and I've even said that in terms of epistemics as a whole, I think it's founded upon that.
I definitely agree, but I do think behavioral states are much more than they seem to be, as in they display rational properties to them. That is, we don't just see mere behavioral traits like the empiricist wants to say. Like the classic empiricist is that they always underdetermine the beliefs and the intentions of the person, but they actually display intentions and meaning and like what we and if they didn't exhibit those things, then you can actually make an argument in favor of the private language argument, because then every single interpretation that we'd have would be an interpretation from a subjective viewpoint of where we have to associate certain types of norms that we establish, but we can't do that because we're not private language users, so on and so forth. And so it just seems like what you're going to have to say is like, okay, well, I do just directly perceive the intentional states of like these types of organisms, and I begin like showing why that's the case. Like, isn't it very odd that a tree does this very often, even if you have counterfactual situations of where you put it in a different environment, it still seems to be doing this, right? Why does it keep doing that type of normative function? Like, why does it keep doing that? Like, are you just gonna basically say it's an automaton the entire time? So
I think like honestly, like I would even go so far to say like I would give the benefit of the doubt to, like, as I say, like like something like a tree or something like that, depending on its neurological complexity. But then, like, I think that at the end of the day, like, the good thing about veganism is that, like, regardless of whether, even if we attributed all of these beings as conscious, just go like, look, less conscious beings are dying, like, you know what I mean? And that's the beautiful thing about it. And it's like, obviously for you, it would be more harmonious.
That hierarchy, though, you know,
Yeah,
as soon as you do that.
You see, that wouldn't be a hierarchy then, would it? Because it would just say, like, look, it's more harmonious because, like, we're having to kill less of both. So, like, it's like, you could say it's equal, it's just a lower value, like, you know, a lower, like, contradiction within the totality, if you will. But I'm gonna have to shoot off now, guys, because I've got like 5 minutes to get there. So take it easy, guys. I hope we've all enjoyed this. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and as always, try to gain some perspective. See you later, guys.